God, look at the state of my hair. It's all over the place. Hopefully I'm live. 2 minutes early. I've noticed a flaw with having a poll there. Can't see half the comments. Just trying to see if I can make the poll disappear, or at least shrink. Nope. Oh, well, I can see the bottom half of the comments as they get commented. Hopefully the 3 of you here are okay. More videos or more polls? Yes, exactly. There's a question for people. So obviously I should have been, some of you here a little early to class, should have been doing the gaming streaming, which I did consider doing, but then I thought, oh, it takes so much setting up. That's okay. I need some people who can deal with the rowdy hordes that might jump in here. What's on the shirt? Cabins and camping stuff. It's cabins and shelters. Shirt from Abby. I've got 2. A blue one that's about leaving places as you found them. And then this one that's cabins and shelters. But yeah, obviously I was going to be gaming, and then I thought, oh, people seemed to be okay, subscribers, but those who joined in seemed to be okay with the chatting the other night. So it's supposed to be gaming, but that means I've got to unconnect the PlayStation 5 from the TV, connect it to the little kind of gaming-y thing that makes it so that the feed goes to the computer. I've got to connect that to the TV, connect the gaming thing to the computer, set it all up, set up OBS, all these different bits and pieces. Whereas to do this, I just have to, and I have to do all the normal stuff like creating a thumbnail and uploading all the thumbnails and stuff like that. Whereas doing this, I just have to do the thumbnail and schedule everything and then go live. And it uses, this is all set up. This laptop either goes out with me if I'm going to be sitting in a cafe somewhere, which didn't happen at all last year. If I'm going to sit in a cafe somewhere typing, then I take this laptop because it is my MacBook Air. And my MacBook Air has a long battery life and is very good for Word document, for just typing books that I can type. I used to use, I've got a couple of different, I've got one beside me, a couple of different tablet, Android tablet kind of computers and a Windows tablet computer thing. No, I don't want to restart now. Remind me tomorrow. And I used to use one of them because they normally have, so I've got one that has like 16 hours of battery life. Probably doesn't now because it's old, but when I got it, it had like 16 hours of battery life. So that was really cool for taking around with me and typing on it. But it kept on, wouldn't turn on. So even though it's got battery in it, it wouldn't turn on. And then I'd be spending 3 hours of having to try and me trying to press the on button to turn the thing on. And then when So yeah, that was to upgrade to a MacBook Air. But the MacBook Air either goes out with me because I'm typing stuff and it's obviously small and easy to carry around, or it sits right here in front of this bookcase um, with a light side of it, ready for me to, and a microphone if I need it, ready for me to talk to camera. So it's so much quicker just to flip the lid open on this and then crack on with streaming. Curious about following the other day's chat was of said in the past I used to do podcasts and webinar type thing, um, kind of thing. Again, the challenge is what to say or what to do for it that's interesting for people. I'm very good at waffling, like thinking I'm going to say this because people might like it, but it's not necessarily always what people want to hear. It's what I want to share normally. Everyone who's jumping in now, we're now on time, so now's the time when people should hopefully start joining in if they're able to make it. I've got nothing specific planned. It's more a case of into when I do any of these kind of things where I see questions and I answer them. It is weak even on the lowest resolution. That's irritating. Imagine if you had that with your senses. Like if you start getting tired, you turn down the resolution of your eyes and the resolution of your ears and the resolution of all your other senses, so that you don't have to use so much brain power to process the world around you, so that you can kind of like have a your normal maybe 15 or 20 hour mode, and then you have a extended battery life mode that makes you go for sort of 3 days, like 72 hours or something, on one charge, like one night's sleep. You just end up not having such good visual resolution, or not being able to hear the sound at such high fidelity. Is it? Mine's good at the moment. I'll just move around a bit. Yeah, mine seems to be okay. It's probably a YouTube thing then. If even Abby is having the problem when Abby's literally in the room next door to me, and we've hopefully got, well, we pay for good internet, so we should have good internet. Trying to upload before we had good internet was a nightmare when you do like uploading digital stuff like YouTube videos all the time. And you see, this is going to take 4 hours to upload. Well, I can't do anything now for 4 hours. The same with computers. On my old computer, I think I've obviously said this before, but on my old computer, which was Abby's computer really, but on that computer, it would take me to process like, say, a 1 hour sleep story would take me something like about 6 hours to process, just to press render, and then on my new one it would take minutes. Yes, hopefully whatever's causing the problem improves. There is 8 of you here today. In a few days I'll have my hair cut and it won't be kind of all wanting to flop forward weirdly. It irritates me every time I see myself. I think, oh, what's happened there? Yeah. What you don't want is for the picture to suddenly freeze. So hopefully, Ellen gets a notification about this as well. Obviously, if she decides that she wants to jump over here and is free, just drinking my coffee while I'm here. There's the question. So I remember I might have shared this, but then I might not have done because it's very old. That many years ago, so probably 2001, 2002, Graham was like, you can't hypnotize me, you can't hypnotize me, you couldn't make me. So, and I've got the video of this still. It's a very low quality video, but I've got the video still. And so what I did was he came to my flat and I hypnotized him, and I said that I was going to make it so that he couldn't see the picture on the wall. And then I sort of, right, back to the room. I'll go and put the kettle on. I'll make a cup of tea. You just occupy yourself. And obviously, the video is on in the in my room. At the time, I lived in a studio flat, and video was the video camera was on, and I went into the little kitchen bit to make a cup of tea, and left Graham trying to. I told him that he would. Graham trying to figure it out, and obviously he was adamant that he couldn't be hypnotized and couldn't not to do something like hallucinate something in or out of his reality. So I left him searching the wall, and he was touching the wall and rubbing it and stepping back and looking and then stepping forward and touching and trying to work it out. And obviously all this is on camera. And then he's like, well, I think I can still see it though. It's not really gone. And he was then like, no, yeah, I can definitely see the picture on the wall. It's definitely there. You haven't been successful. You haven't been able to make me hallucinate the picture out of my experience. It's definitely on the wall still. And he would then describe what the picture was. But there was no picture ever on the wall. It was just a blank wall. I just knew that the way to make him hallucinate was to give the motivation to prove me wrong, that I can't make him not see it, which means that he has to make himself see it and believe that he's not hallucinating and that what he's seeing is the real thing, so that he would then hallucinate a picture on the wall where it's actually just a beige, horrible wall, as I had in that studio flat. Can't even remember what made me think of that or what the reason was for saying that. But anyway, just a random thing that if you can't get someone, if someone challenges you, just sort of feed into it rather than, if I had tried to make him hallucinate, he would have gone against me and proved me wrong and not hallucinated. If I tell him that I'm trying to make him hallucinate, but actually I'm doing the opposite, I'm actually pretending that he's going to be not seeing something that's there or whatever it happens to be, then that's kind of a easier way to go. Favorite book? No idea. I have sort of some that I used to read frequently, some of my Erickson books, especially the ones 8 now. Those ones there, I've read them probably a good few dozen times each, those four in that little bit there. Um, because I found them really well written. Uh, best tips for overcoming. Well, for panic, I've recently on this channel, so on this channel, just in case you're unsure of how we post on this channel, I post with Dr. David Lewis, who's a neuroscientist. I've got, I don't know, probably nearly all of his books up on the shelf over there. I post with Dr. David Lewis and we take in turns. So generally, because we don't live near enough to each other for us to both do a lot together, what we do is 1 week one of us posts and then the next week the other one posts. And sometimes we might be either jointly posting about the same topic, going through, say, a theme. So in the run up to summer, I think our plan is possibly to post some bits about weight loss, or, being the kind of weight that you want to be. It doesn't have to be weight loss, but, having your ideal kind of making sure you're eating what you want to be eating, etc. But other times, like recently, David has been posting through his memory series, and I've been just posting other bits between that, with one video I posted that complemented his memory series, which was of me memorizing a packet of cards. So we post every week, but we alternate. My last 2 times of posting, I posted specifically about panic and handling anxiety. So I posted about what to do to reduce and minimize having anxiety in the first place. And the previous time I posted what to do if you have panic attacks. So at the point of having the panic attack, what you do at the point of having a panic attack is, rather than trying to do deep breathing or something, which is going completely against what your body is trying to do, at the middle of a panic attack is incredibly difficult. Panicking, it's very hard to then think, right, let's do some really nice I breathe out all of the breath in your lungs so that your body is doing deep breaths, but you're not having to do the deep breathing. You're letting you start doing deep breathing. So you're resetting your breathing and then tricking your body into doing its job. And for avoiding, making anxiety less likely to occur, my last video was kind of on that. There was lots of different, because your brain responds to something that you've been mentally rehearsing the same way as it responds to real life. So it kind of tricks your brain into, it's like a bit like post-hypnotic suggestions. It tricks your brain into thinking it's already been there and done that. So say, for example, something that I could end up encountering, public speaking. Say, for example, you're nervous about public speaking. You can then mentally rehearse public speaking and do that lots of times, and your brain then ends up being convinced that you've already been perfectly fine public speaking, whatever that means to you. So it could be fine, could be being calm, it could be being excited, it could be having a sense of feeling energetic. So being fine public speaking means something different to everyone out there. But what you're doing is mentally rehearsing you doing that, so that then your brain has the pattern laid down for, when I'm in that context, that is the pattern that I as a being follow. And so it just makes it more likely that when you end up in the real situation, you just instinctively follow the pattern you've been practicing over and over again and laying down. So that's kind of the main thing that's incredibly helpful, is not trying to change something in the moment, but trying to make sure that that moment doesn't happen the way it used to in the first place, by making it so that your brain has alternate patterns, far healthier patterns or preferred patterns to respond to. Any animal, what would I be? probably don't know. I like the idea of a dolphin because then you're just swimming around in the sea and hopefully you can get away from everything. But then dolphins are social creatures, so there's a bit of a flaw there. I like humpback whales as well. I prefer humpback whales actually to dolphins. They seem a lot slower paced with their lives. So a humpback whale probably. They make a bit of a racket. That might always drive everyone away. Make a few ghostly sounds. Um, or if I lived long enough, don't know. Don't know. It depends on what I have going on in my head. For example, there are animals that I would think, yeah, I'd be that animal, but then at the same time, it wouldn't have the brains and the intelligence, which means that I wouldn't have the brains and the intelligence, and so that would end up limiting the sort of benefits of it. So, for example, I would happily be some kind of animal that I don't know. There's a whale that lives for hundreds and hundreds of years in the Arctic, I think. It looks a bit battered and bruised, but it's cool. So I would possibly be a whale like that that can live hundreds and hundreds of years. Um, some of them have been found with harpoons in them that obviously were harpooned centuries earlier. There's a jellyfish, I think, which is virtually immortal. I'd possibly be happy to be that, being able to be immortal. You're a bit limited by the knowledge you can gain from being stuck under the sea, but being immortal would be helpful as long as I can avoid getting eaten. So I'd want my brain, but I'd want to be something that lives for as long as I can. Ideally into maybe a tree. That's not an animal, but if it's a living being or a living thing, then a tree that can pretty much live for thousands and thousands and thousands of years would be cool. Yeah. See, another advantage of being something like a dolphin or a whale is obviously that they spend more time half sleeping. One thing that I would like technology to reach before I die is obviously being technologically advanced enough to be able to potentially transplant your brain into a computer and then perhaps living on forever because of that. I don't have any phobias, or at least not as far as I'm aware. I'm generally quite indifferent to most things. Um, but I spent a few weeks obsessing about the idea of um, if you transferred your consciousness into a computer, for example, or into a robot, and you obviously stop existing because of it, are you aware that you are the one that's existing elsewhere now? So that's kind of something that was crossing my mind, is that you that's in the computer or that's in the robot or whatever, they would be aware that they've got this continuation of existence that goes back with memories of when they were you. But would you actually be the one, like when I wake up in the morning, I am me who's woken up in the morning. I am aware that I went to bed the night before. I wake up in the morning, and at least my experience is that that's still me. But if I woke up in a computer, but me, the physical being, was dead because I'm now in the computer, does that me that's in the computer, is that going to be me, as in actual consciousness of me, or is it going to be a consciousness of them that just happens to have the life memories of me, so they don't realize that they're not me, that they're actually their own unique individual, but I stop existing, I'm technically just dead. And so it actually transferring consciousness into the computer didn't benefit me as a person in the slightest, because I died at the point that this occurred, the transferring the consciousness, and the consciousness is now in something else. So that's something that I spent lots of time thinking about a few weeks back, about the idea of, like, how would you know? Because the you that ends up in the computer, for example, would genuinely believe that they are the same, a continuation, that it had worked. My consciousness got transferred into the computer. I'm here, existing. I'm aware that I was there. It all is a continuation. It's fine. But that doesn't mean that that's me, in the same way that, so my kind of philosophizing was, okay, imagine if exactly the same situation, but I don't die. So my consciousness has gone into the computer. They 100% believe that they have this continuous existence, and unknown to them, me and my body hasn't gone anywhere. It's just that because the computer was powerful enough, it was able to scan my brain, transfer all of that information into some digital code, and it was then on a computer. And I have then been able to walk out of the chair perfectly fine as me here and now. I am me with a continued experience of being me, but they will be them thinking that they're me with a continued experience that they've got. So it was like, you know, is it any good transferring your consciousness, say, into a computer or something, if actually the you that's here now, that's taking the act of transferring your consciousness, ceases to exist, because the you that ends up there is the one that exists and not the you here? So yeah, so I spent a long time trying to think about that, and to think about, actually, although I had initially not given it much thought and just thought, yes, when humans can transfer consciousness into machines, I would instantly be thinking, yep, I'm up for that, because machines can obviously repair themselves and replicate, and you can use things like the cloud to make sure that even if one server, for example, went down, the whole machine still would operate. So obviously, if technology advances enough, you'd have some variation on a cloud type service. So you could essentially be immortal and live until perhaps you choose whether you want to live or not, rather than that decision kind of being forced upon you. So initially, I'd just been thinking, oh yeah, of course I'd be up for that. And then I started thinking deeply about it, and then thinking, actually, how do I know that it's me? Yep, I've heard that as well. I do use that a lot in my stories because of it being therapeutic. So when I'm trying to have the listener go through mental rehearsal of things, I will use it a lot to make sure that they're able to be mentally rehearsing disassociated before they mentally rehearse associated, so that they can kind of look at a pattern playing out in a safe environment because they're watching it, not being in it, and then they can go into it and experience it playing out. So they can now have a feeling of and an experience of what it's like to respond in that way. But obviously, in the context of a story rather than in the context of real life. So they're laying down the patterns without sort of within the context of a story. Something I got, you may or may not be interested, but it sat beside me, so I thought I'd get that. For the Abby got me for our anniversary. It was 2 packs of playing cards. I wanted the Avengers one, not because it's the Avengers, although the Avengers are cool, but because obviously it's purple. And then I didn't ask for these, but Abby got me some Sherlock Holmes ones as well, which is cool. And the boxes feel nice as well. Yeah, the purple one is shiny as well. The Sherlock one isn't. These are from the same company that did the Darren Brown ones. So you got the Avengers. So different ones. Let's go to the pictures. Just go through some. For anyone who knows the Avengers, do I believe in ghosts? No, I've not seen any evidence to warrant a belief in ghosts. I've looked into it a lot, looked into ghosts and done all sorts of things in relation to ghosts. But in terms of evidence that would convince me, I haven't seen any. I think that's all of the picture ones. Yeah, I haven't seen any evidence that would convince me where I would say, yes, that means it definitely is ghosts. Well, it's not good that it wasn't the first one. That really is going to throw you, given they've made a big effort to do things in an order. So obviously your homework is to watch all the Avengers movies, but you've got to watch all the other movies. The trouble with the Avengers movies is you can just watch them. Obviously, technically, I think you could probably watch any of them and the movie itself would kind of make sense. But part of the challenge is that you don't really gain the connection with the characters and the sort of interwoven stories between the characters if you literally just watch, say, one movie or a couple of the movies. You kind of need to see all the others as well. So I would say start off with, say, Iron Man, the first Iron Man, and just watch through from there in order, and then it'll all make sense, and you'll end up really coming to like a lot of the characters, and then that makes it even more kind of impactful as the movies go on, because they now characters you know and are familiar with. I like the DC movies as well because I like Superman, and I quite like the recent Superman films, and I like the Snyder cut of what's it, the recent movie. But yeah, the first Iron Man film, you'll think, oh, Tony Stark, he's a bit of an annoying man. He's arrogant. But the whole point is, again, that if you watch them, you then get to see the characters grow and develop, and you get to end up liking them. I can't imagine watching them out of order because of the fact that if you watch them out of order, there are things that happen that you end up ruining other bits because you've seen things that you shouldn't have seen yet. Or, yeah, it's a bit like, I don't know, picking up a novel that reveals something from book 2 and you're reading book 4 and you've kind of just ruined something from one of the other books. That means that if you then try and watch book 2, if you try and then read book 2 when you're reading them book 1 and book 2, you think, well, I already know where this is going. I already know the fate of this character or whatever. For me, Star Wars is a difficult one because you kind of think, watch them in chronological order because then you're watching them in chronological order. But then at the same time, kind of watching them and then doing the backstory bit can be okay. Unfortunately, because of the way it's done, I would say that if it was done slightly differently, because the trouble is, if you watch them in chronological order, the oh my god, there's a bombshell there moments, and not bombshells because you know it because you've already seen the 3 episodes before the 3 episodes that you're about to watch in the middle. But likewise, if you watch the 3 episodes in the middle, so the 1780s films first, you then end up ruining the prequels because you already know where everything's going. So none of it's a surprise to you. So I just think that the way they did it meant that they ruined their, almost however you watch it, they end up ruining their own hello Ellen. Yeah, I think however you do it, you almost end up ruining your own kind of or they've ruined their own kind of moments that are supposed to shock you or take you by surprise. I think the difficulty with the Star Wars ones is that it was always planned to have 9 films, not necessarily the exact storylines that did end up occurring, but it was always planned to have 9 films. And but George Lucas could only get funding for 3, and so he chose the bit that was the main bit of the story and made that the story that he would do, completely skipping 1, 2, and 3. So in theory, if he'd been believed in terms of, believing in what he was, if the studio believed that he could, that Star Wars would be a big thing, he would have made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Most likely, but then he wouldn't have been able to use the cast that were in 4, 5, 6 because they would have got too old, probably, for the roles they had to take by the time he got round to filming those films. But yeah, I don't mind prequels after the fact if it fills in something and is helpful. And I didn't mind the Star Wars prequels generally. I think Jar Jar Binks gets a lot of a bad rap. I like Jar Jar Binks. He's one of my favorite characters in the prequels. And the sequels, they just did it stupidly. They were okay as films. I liked the first one of the sequels when I went and watched it in the cinema, but I was kind of I don't know. I didn't like that Luke Skywalker didn't crop up until near the end. Um, and then I didn't like that because they just decided to change. They didn't have a clear plan for the sequels. I think that ruined it. I watched the sequels because I wanted to know how the story ended. Um, and it annoyed me that they changed directors between the first of the films, the second film, and then back to the third film. And so they totally just tried to rewrite everyone's films and paths that things were taking. But I would have liked them to have continued on focusing on the original, like Luke Skywalker, etc., and not kind of changed the path like they did. So yeah, so I like Star Trek probably more than I like Star Wars generally. And when Star Trek was on back in the '90s, when Next Generation was on, I was more of a Babylon 5 person than a Star Trek person. I liked Star Trek, but I liked that Babylon 5 had, right from the outset, um, Donald P. Belisario, or whatever his name is, said that Babylon 5 is a 5-year story. And I like that. I liked that there was going to be this thing that was going to be a 5-year story arc where there would be stuff going on in every episode that's unique to the episode, but at the same time, there'd be that overarching story that would crop up through every episode, more in some episodes than others, that you're actually watching it to follow that overarching 5-year story rather than it just being uh, this episode is only this episode and it will never get mentioned again. And then that episode is that episode and nothing from it will ever get mentioned again. Which at the time, when they both were on, Star Trek Next Generation was more a, something happens every episode and that's pretty much it. There were some exceptions, but generally that was it. And Babylon 5 was more of a kind of, you could follow something and follow the characters. And I do like the Star Trek films and the Next Gen films as well. And I was fortunate enough to get to see Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen in a play a few years back, and then meet them briefly afterwards. Meet them as in they came outside and signed stuff. Not meet them as in get to sit down and have a cup of Earl Grey tea with them. Yep, they are cool. I've Ian McKellen, I saw him here in Chichester after I'd seen them over in Brighton for the film, for the play that they were both in. I saw them in Chichester. Saw Ian McKellen in Chichester when he was filming, not filming, doing the play. Can't remember what it is. One of the Shakespeare plays. I went and what surprised me that there was this like pretty much 80-year-old man carrying someone for like many minutes for one of the scenes of the play while he's acting out his piece. And I was thinking I probably couldn't do that now, and I'm like 40 years young, nearly 40 years younger, 35 years younger or whatever. Poor little magpie. Just seeing what your comments are. So yeah, so the idea of jumping on here and doing this, although we're already 45 minutes in, which shocks me because it feels like I only started talking about 3 or 4 minutes ago, and I've just realised that it's 45 minutes. You should ask the telemarketer if it's okay if you can call them back at home later, if they can give you their number. Just say you're busy at the moment, but if you give me your home phone number, I'll call you back this evening. I know I did throw it on people, but it doesn't normally matter. Normally, when I seem to do anything where it's like this, people find things to talk about that they ask, whatever it happens to be. I've already been asked about some books. Yeah, I, in fairness, just ignore them. But then I try to ignore anyone who telephones me. Oh, I hate spontaneity. Unless it's really well planned. Nothing worse than not having things planned. Yeah, I would love to not have to have a phone. I did want an old Nokia 3310 or something so that I could just literally make and receive phone calls if I needed to, maybe send single line text messages. But because of what I do, I always end up needing a smartphone where I can just literally um, respond to messages on YouTube and Facebook and um, emails and all sorts of rubbish that I get that I have to respond to. Your cat's turned into a turkey. Yeah, so the books that I read a lot of were this series. They are the seminars, workshops, and lectures of Milton H. Erickson, volume 1, 2, 3, and 4. Uh, volume 1 is smaller, but yeah, so these ones are reasonably well read. Unfortunately, this one at some point in its life has got creased. I don't like things getting creased. But they're really, really easy to read. So they're kind of clear, big spaced areas, lots of headings so that you can, they smell nice as well. Lots of headings to follow. This one happens to be about dancing and improving dance skills. So I really liked these as something to read. Creased is bad. It means they've been abused. And I've got a couple of copies of this. This is kind of my reading copy. But The February Man is another one that's a really, really good book to read if you're ever interested in reading Milton Erickson's books. So The February Man, Ernest Rossi went through this with Milton Erickson through the case that is what this book is about. And I do have a lot of Udemy stuff currently over on the. I don't know if I can find it without losing all my tabs accidentally. I have so many tabs open, I'm worried I'd click an X and I'd close the window. But over on my hypnotherapy group over on Facebook, I've currently got a discount going on there where you can get discounted access to all of my Udemy courses. I've got like 15 or 16 of them. But yeah, so with this one, it's about one case that Erickson had where he became the February man. And Ernest Rossi went through the whole thing with him. So how this is done is that Ernest Rossi and Erickson sat down, listened to the recording of the case, and would keep pausing it and say, "What are you doing there?" And then um, Milton Erickson would say, "I'm doing this, 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 and this." And then Ernest Rossi would they press play again, play a bit further, and then when they get to have listened to a little bit, they'd pause it again, and Ernest Rossi would say, "What have you been doing now?" And they went through all of the sessions like that. But then Milton Erickson died. Ernest Rossi got quite down about Milton Erickson's death, and so couldn't bring himself to actually finish the book and get the book published. And so it took a number of years before this got published because it was supposed to be a continuation of the series I've just shown you in terms of like and of there's another 3 books that Ernest Rossi and Milton Erickson did together. So it's supposed to be like a whole bunch of books continuing on. But yeah, so with this, the idea is that he's working with somebody who has some problems which stem from a number of different incidents through their life. This is the February man. So it stems from a bunch of different incidents through this woman's life. And Erickson's way of helping her is that he, in her mind, he meets her when she's a young child and asks her, how are you? Is there anything I can help you with, etc. And then helps her in her mind when she's a young child. And then he says, "Look, I'll be back in the future to catch up with you." And then he pops back and again, and I think, if I recall, that she's the one that gives the time that it's February that he's appeared. So he then appears like a few years later and he chats to her, "How have things been going? Is there anything I can help you with?" And he goes through her whole life, essentially being a therapist that drops in every few years to say, "Has anything happened over the last few years that you could do with help with? Because I'll help you with it." Helps her with those bits and then drops out of her life again. And then a few years later, he drops back in again, helps her with a few more bits. And essentially, as Ernest Rossi describes it, he's going through a process of evolving her consciousness by going through her whole life, kind of helping her in small stages up until the present day. And there's some people I've done that approach with therapeutically, where it seems like the easiest approach to take to help them is to drop into their life when they're at different ages, like when they're 4 or 5 years old, then again when they're like 9 years old, and then when they're like 12 or 13, and then again when they're say 15, 16, and then when they're like 19 or 20, and just literally going all the way through their life, kind of dropping in and clearing up any issues that have gone on just in those few years rather than trying to retrospectively fix a whole life almost. So yeah, so I quite like that idea. I've got some books, kind of interrogationy books. I've got books obviously on brainwashing, etc. Um, but yeah, Milton Erickson used to teach the police how to use hypnosis when they were doing interrogation. That the main way they would use hypnosis wasn't in any kind of formal hypnotic induction way. It was to just use the idea that hypnosis is about building a deep rapport with people. so that people end up feeling like they know you like a good friend, and they start treating you like you're a very good friend. And so they end up telling you things that they would tell a very good friend, not realizing that they're actually telling a police officer these things, kind of almost becoming unaware that they're just admitting all this stuff to a police officer. Maybe the water's dirty. Somewhere here, I do have other copies of all those books. I've got a book up there from the 1940s, I think it is, of Erickson. For anyone who doesn't know, I've got a couple of Erickson books on my bookshelf. There's nothing on the front cover or the back cover. Time Distortion in Hypnosis. Oh, 1959. So that's... I actually, this one I bought, but going back many, many years, I borrowed from the library Time Distortion in Hypnosis. They didn't have it physically in the library, but when you go to the library, obviously you can look up what books they've got in stock that aren't in any of the libraries, but are just in stock in case anyone ever, yeah, because they're never borrowed. And one of them was Time Distortion in Hypnosis by Milton Erickson, and it was a first edition as well. And so I kept on borrowing it and reborrowing it and reborrowing it, knowing that no one else was wanting to borrow it, but I kept borrowing it over and over and over and over again. And I really wanted to end up owning it, but wasn't immoral enough to kind of tell them that I'd lost it. So I think if you lost it, you had to pay like £2 or something. And the book at the time, when I looked on eBay to try and buy it, this is going back to the early 2000s. When I looked on eBay to try and buy it, it was like 100 and something pounds, and there was no way that I could afford that at the time. So I thought, well, you know, do I lose it so that I have to pay £2 for the missing book? And I never did. I eventually just decided, I suppose I can't keep on borrowing it from the library and just renewing my borrowing over and over again, kind of indefinitely. So I gave it back to the library, and then bought myself a copy because it got re-released. I think I might have given the re-released copy away. I don't see it. It got re-released, and so I got a paperback copy. Crown House Publishing re-released it, and so I had that paperback copy for quite some time. And then a few years back, I eventually got hold of a hardcover copy to add to my collection. But it's really interesting. It's got things like different. So the idea is that it's literally all about time distortion and all about time distortion experiments, which obviously I find fascinating. Time distortion experiments and the changes you can make to perception of time. And yeah, technically, I bet if I'd asked a nice librarian and smiled, they might have just said, look, you know, keep it and run it through as you've lost it. But I'm too honest. But yeah, so it has things like I think it's someone being told, having their perception of time changed so that it takes, as far as they're concerned in their brain, hours for the spoon to get from the plate to their mouth. and you can do that as a weight loss technique. Make it so that if someone ends up thinking, "Oh God, eating is so tedious because it's taken me so long for every single mouthful. It takes like an hour to get your food from the plate to your mouth." Um, there are things like making it so that you think you're reading at a normal speed, but what observers see is you kind of going through it rapidly when you're reading in your head at a normal speed. Well, of course, I say sorry. I've end up harming something. I also like to stop at junctions in Grand Theft Auto, not cause harm in Grand Theft Auto. Ideally, not steal cars if I can avoid it. But yeah, so it's just like a bunch of different time distortion research stuff that Erickson got up to, all put into a book um, to look at the different things. So you've got things like studying, where you can change your perception of time so that minutes of real world time pass while you spend hours and hours of hypnotic time studying, so that you've squeezed lots of studying into a small amount of time. Um, so there's a lot of really interesting stuff you can do with time distortion. And some people are obviously very naturally good at distorting their perception of time. Other people are not so good at distorting their perception of time, and so may obviously need to get a lot more practice. Speeding time up, there could be. Obviously, it can make time go faster at times where you're maybe doing something boring or doing something where, um, like pain. That was one Erickson used to use speeding time up for pain control. So he would make, with people with chronic pain who say when a bout of a migraine or whatever happens, he would make it so that the experience of the migraine would last a fraction of a second, even if it lasted hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of real world time. So they would go through their life like normal, but the actual pain part would have speeding up so that the migraine goes by in a flash. Um, I'm trying to remember the exact wording used. There is bits and pieces of wording. So there are some. Most of it is kind of common sense stuff. You literally just hypnotize the person and tell them what it. So a lot of it is very direct. It's very much you hypnotize the person, tell them what it is that you expect them to do. So as an example, so I have bits like that, which I'll show, and then I'll just read it briefly. So it's broken down into Erickson subject, Erickson subject, etc. So just this one little bit here, I haven't looked at what this is to do with. This is in the introduction, so it's I'll just read a bit so that it makes sense. If you're all sitting comfortably. And yes, I do imagine that some of my sleep stories probably do make it seem like I'm on coke all day, every day. So in essence, the studies here presented concern experience induced in the hypnotized subject as a result of verbal suggestion. By experience, we mean the contents of the subject's field of awareness. It thus includes all those entities which are immediately known, among which are sensations, drives, feelings, emotions, images, meaning, tone, volition, etc., and memories thereof. It's important to point out that this definition makes no stipulation as to whether a given experiential entity is demonstrable to others or not. A chair that two persons look at and describe to each other is an example, is an experiential entity, just as it is an just as is a hallucinated chair known only to one individual. It's well known, of course, that the field of awareness may be altered by the direction of one's attention, but this is not an important consideration here. On the other hand, under the above definition, we cannot recognize such a term as unconscious experience, when this term means experience of which the subject is not aware. An unconscious person may be aware of experience in the form of a dream, of course. Thus, he is conscious of the dream, though clinically unconscious. On the other hand, when there is no awareness, there is no experience in the sense in which we shall use the word. Let us suppose that a man participates in a 15-minute conference but makes no note of the time. After the conference, we ask him, "How long did the conference last?" And he replies, "I don't know. I didn't note the time." We then ask him, "How long did its duration seem to be?" And he replies, "It seems to have been about 25 minutes. This statement as to how long the interval between the beginning and the end of the conference seemed to be, we shall call the seeming duration of the interval. Let us now suppose that our friend, instead of ignoring the time, noted that it was 9 o'clock when he started the conference and that it was 9:15 when he ended it. It's quite obvious then, provided the clock was running properly, that the tip of the minute hand moved over 15 minutes, over a 15-minute division during the interval between the start and the termination of the conference. In this case, our friend, if asked how long the conference lasted, can truthfully reply 15 minutes. In so stating this result of his clock observation, i.e., that the interval was 15 minutes long, he's giving what we shall term the clock reading of the interval. These two concepts, seeming duration and clock reading of an interval, will be discussed at greater length in another section. We wish to point out here, however, that the units employed have the same name in each case, minutes in this instance, and that all intervals that can be known in experience can be considered from both points of view. Furthermore, depending upon circumstances, they may be in close agreement or wide variance. In the above examples, the two differed by 10 minutes. When there's a marked difference between the seeming duration and the clock reading of a given interval, we say that time distortion is present. As will be pointed out later, both duration and sequence are known in immediate experience, for we can say of two events that one is before or after, or simultaneous with the other, and within limits. We can readily distinguish between the lengths of two successive intervals. This knowing of sequence and duration is affected by means of our time sense, or sense of experiential time. And the present studies were undertaken in order to learn whether or not the sense of duration of an interval can be deliberately altered by means of verbal suggestion in the trance state. We shall have a good deal to say about experiential time in the following pages, but it's well to note here that it's apparently a concept which is not readily grasped by some individuals. The reason for this is not at present clear, but it has led to considerable amount of difficulty in the communication of our findings to such persons who've not infrequently stated that they had not the slightest idea as to what the authors were driving at. The initial experiments involved the use of a metronome, which was striking at a constant rate of 1 stroke per second. The suggestion was given to the hypnotized subject that the metronome was being gradually slowed down, and the reports indicate that the subject actually experienced a marked slowing in the rhythm. In other words, the seeming duration of the intervals reportedly became greatly prolonged. The next studies involve the participation by the subject in hallucinatory activity during the seemingly prolonged intervals, and the results indicated that Large amounts of such activity could be engaged in under these circumstances. In other words, with the clock reading between metronome strokes 1 second and the seeming duration of the intervals 1 minute, the subject reported during 10 successive strokes an amount of activity that was appropriate to 10 minutes rather than 10 seconds. It's especially significant that this activity seemed to progress at a normal and customary rate as far as the subject was concerned. Subsequently, a technique was developed whereby hallucinatory activity could be produced under conditions of time distortion without the use of a metronome. The following report of an experiment will serve to give the reader a general idea of the procedure which, with variations, was used in most of this study, which is why I've just read the whole of this introduction to get to this point, so that you understand that bit. The subject, who in a moderately deep trance, lay motionless on a couch with her eyes closed throughout. E stands for experimenter, S for subject. The experimenter was likely Erickson, so I just thought it was Erickson, but experimenter's fine. Experimenter. What would you like to do now? Subject. I'd like to spend half an hour riding in an automobile. Experimenter. Now listen to me carefully. When I give you the starting signal by saying now, you're going to spend at least a half hour of your special time riding in an automobile. And it's going to be a nice ride. Here comes the starting signal. Now. 10 seconds later. Now, make your mind a blank. The subject was then waked. Tell me what happened, please. The subject told how she and her sister, both children at the time, sat on the back seat of the car and counted cows seen along the way. Her sister won the game, counting 45 to her 42. Then they decided to count licenses bearing the letter C. This was slow, for there was but little traffic. They both saw the same ones, 14 in all. Then they stopped at a roundabout. No, they stopped at a roadside stand to buy lemonade from a little girl with pigtails and several missing teeth because they felt sorry for her. Was it real? Yes. Were there any omissions? No. Did you enjoy it? Oh, yes. How long did it seem? A half hour, easy. It's most important to point out that the subject lay motionless during this hallucinatory experience. The following terminology is applied to the various parts of the above procedure. Item 3, this contains an, so I think that must have been that. This contains an introductory expression, now listen to me carefully, when I give you the starting signal by saying now. You're going to spend at least half an hour of your special time, is the assigning of the suggested personal time. So it then just goes on to tell you what it is that they're doing. The expression riding in an automobile and it's going to be a nice ride is known as the activity instruction. Here comes the starting signal, now, is obviously self-explanatory. Item 4, this expression is known as the termination signal. Item 4 was now make your mind blank. That was at the end of the experience. Item 5, this is the request for a report. Item 6, this is the subject's report. Item 13, request for the seeming duration. Item 14, this is the seeming duration as reported by the subject. And obviously they'd recorded the 10-second clock. So that's in answer to the question of what kind of suggestion, what's in there, what kind of suggestions were used. That's what was used, if that's any help. I'm just scrolling back. I could see out the corner of my eye that there was writing. Glad you enjoy the meditations. Yeah, Erickson did, obviously, because of his own experience, huge amounts of work around pain because he always wanted to try and find something that worked for him. And it led him, obviously, to do other bits as well. So, for example, he ended up finding that the best way to relieve his pain in relation to self hypnosis was to just wake up in the morning and say to himself, essentially an implementation intention before that term existed or was even being studied. Um, by lunchtime, I'd like to be pain free. And he'd give himself that idea and he'd say, yeah, he'd sort of tell himself that and then he'd crack on with his day. And so he would just, his view was, you're not two people. You're not a conscious mind and an unconscious mind. You're one being. You're listening. You can hear your voice. You don't have to do any of this. Close your eyes, go inside, you know, have these instructions. Just tell yourself what you want to do, when by, make sure it's realistic and achievable, etc. And then just let yourself crack on with it and don't interfere. If it knows how to do the job, it will just crack on and get it done. And he had tried all sorts of things to get rid of his pain, like um, he talks about forcing his throat onto the end of his bed, onto the wooden end of his bed, to cause himself as much pain to his throat as he could. Because once he then gets rid of his pain that he's causing himself, because he's caused it, he gets to take it away. And so he would cause himself loads of pain, but try and take away all the other pain with the pain he's taking away. So he tried things like that. He tried all sorts of different techniques, but just found that he would end up waking up, telling himself, get rid of it by this time, giving a realistic time period for the pain to go by. And then it would get to like lunchtime and he'd suddenly think, oh, I haven't been in pain for a little while. And he'd just suddenly have kind of an awareness that he hadn't had the pain. Um, but different people are good at different things. So one person might get rid of the pain by hallucinating it outside of themselves or hallucinating it as something different, like seeing the pain as a color or a light instead of as physical pain. Um, Someone might mess with it and work out the size and shape of it and then change the size and shape of it to something else, which means that you've also, by changing the size and shape of it as a representation, you're then changing the pain itself. So there's lots of different things. You know, someone might be good with time distortion. Well, the metronome is nothing different to sitting in the front room listening to all the ticking animals, except there's lots of them all out of sync with each other. It is very, very common for people to complain about my pauses, and yet I've now, only in recent months, but I've now listened to other people's stuff like Michael Seeley, Jason Stevenson, the Sleeping Pod or whatever it is, Sleep Cove. All these people do pauses kind of no different in length to what I would do. And I don't see them get lots of complaints about the length of their pauses. Um, but when people complain about my pauses, often they talk about these enormous pauses. And it's actually very rare for a pause on one of my things to be longer than, say, 8 seconds. And it's actually quite rare for them to be longer than, say, 4 or 5 seconds. Normally, about 4 seconds is what the average long pause is on my stuff. Otherwise, it's just a couple of seconds for a break between one sentence and the next. Um, but yeah, people will end up saying, you know, you leave these massive long silences, and there aren't massive long silences. I hope you got your potatoes from the potato selling alien, although they do live in Victorian England, so you probably haven't. Oh, I wonder why. Because I clicked through to my merch from the uh, earlier on because Abby wanted to know something. uh, the cost of something, or the cost of something to me. I think it was something like that. And so I clicked through to it on my mobile phone. So I wonder why that's stopped working. I'll have to check it out. That's irritating. I see we've got at least one person who said, no, don't ever do these again. When I might, blah, 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 blah. Let's see if I can talk. When I myself am being hypnotized, do I remember what I say or do during the trance once I'm awake again? Um, I normally have a general awareness. I've done things obviously like ventriloquism to hypnotize myself, where I've got, my hand hypnotizing me, things like that. Obviously, you've probably seen all the videos. Um, and doing that, for example, I'm aware that my hand is talking to me, but I'm not aware that I'm the one doing the talking. And then afterwards, I'm aware of the experience that I've had, but it does feel like I was listening to someone giving me instructions, and then I was responding to that person giving me instructions. It doesn't feel like I was the one doing it, even though I'm kind of aware that I was the one doing it, because I'm aware that I was being hypnotized through ventriloquism. um, Generally, if someone's hypnotized, hypnosis itself obviously doesn't feel like anything at all. Hypnosis is just focusing attention and increasing responsivity. So hypnosis itself doesn't feel like anything. But if you're guided into a specific state, because memories are state dependent, it's generally easier to remember things when you're in a similar state to what you learned them in. So if you're deeply relaxed and then you're in a sort of normal state where you might be kind of almost not remembering bits and pieces of it, or you can be so focused on one thing that, like, for example, if say during one of my bedtime stories, if you're deeply absorbed in the mental imagery, for example, of something I'm saying, like, I don't know, say I was talking about sparkling moonlight on a lake, and you just became really absorbed with the idea for whatever reason, you might then shut off from the sound of my voice in terms of your conscious awareness, because you're so focused on the sparkling on the lake. And obviously we do this in everyday life. You have this worry on your mind, and your friend is stood beside you talking to you, and you suddenly think, oh, sorry, what did you say again? I wasn't paying attention. And you've got no idea what they've just been talking about, because you were so focused on something else that your ears kind of almost shut off from paying attention to the sound of their voice. So that can happen, where you can not necessarily remember everything that the person says, because one thing, natural forgetting happens, but secondly, if you are so focused and absorbed around one idea, if you're very, very absorbed, you kind of do almost shut off your hearing as far as your conscious awareness goes. You're still hearing and still responding. It's just that there's no need for the higher cortex to get involved in the process. So you're busy absorbed in whatever it is you're doing. Yeah, I do intentionally hope to cause time distortion during the pauses, normally an extending of time, because hopefully the idea is during the pauses, people are so focused on what's going on around the pauses that they stop being aware that they're not using any internal dialogue at that moment. They've got nothing that's beating out time in any way. So if you're talking to yourself thinking, oh, he's just stopped talking, I wonder when he's going to start talking again. Oh, there he is, he started talking. If you're talking to yourself, then in your head, then the pause doesn't seem that long, because you've got some internal dialogue which is beating out a certain, how long it took you, like from your lifetime of experience. You know roughly how long it took you to say the sentence that you were saying in your head, because you just know roughly how long certain things take to say, like certain words and what have you. So you fill that gap with your internal dialogue, and the pause doesn't seem that long. If you shut up, you've got, I'm not saying anything, you're not saying anything, there's nothing else going on. There's no time reference in that moment, in that paused moment. And so that could literally be any length of time at all. And as I've just read in this book, that could be, you know, 10 minutes a tick on a metronome. You know, the space between one tick and the next could be 10 minutes rather than 1 second. It doesn't really matter. It could be an hour between one tick and the next tick. So once you've got nothing going, nothing for time reference between those 2 points, you can create pretty much any length of time. Oh, someone else doesn't like me doing this. Um, yeah, I'll check out the link obviously after I'm done here. Abby was involved in. I was saying to Abby, this is the type of logo I've wanted. I'm just seeing if there's anything else I missed. Yeah, I was saying to Abby, you know, I want a logo where I said I wanted to ideally, and some of you will obviously kind of know this, even if I've not explicitly said it. I wanted to be able to animate a lot of my sleep meditations so that I could make them something that if you just want to use it as something relaxing to watch, not just listen to, something that you can have on to just relax to and watch something relaxing, you can do that. But what I quite like the idea of was ending up creating some that would be specific characters. And I was saying to Abby, I really wanted like a cloud, a sleepy cloud as a character. And so it was kind of like Abby and myself were talking about what it should look like, what color. I was saying I didn't want it to be totally white because it felt odd to have it like a pure white, because it would just look odd. It would look very bright on a computer screen, etc. But obviously, I didn't want it like, we were talking about greys, and Abby was saying that grey would be too dark, and I was saying, well, it's difficult to know exactly what color. I said I don't think necessarily grey, but it has to be kind of an off-white of some kind, and then it was like, what kind of a face needs to be on it, and so we were just sort of talking about it. But yeah, I was sort of saying that I'd love to have it where I could have like stories that I'm making where there's like a cloud that goes through that. There, like on the thumbnails, there's a cloud that goes through experiences, and I use the animation software to make a cloud that can act out various stories, etc. But yes, it was all collaborative. Luckily, the poll has stuck exactly where it is for me. But at the beginning, I was struggling with the poll getting in my way, and then it just, once I went live a few minutes later, it jumped into the right place. In relation to creating hallucination with self-hypnosis, you can do it, but obviously every single individual is different. Some people are very good at hallucinating, some people aren't very good at hallucinating. I gave the story right at the beginning. about how I managed to trick my best friend into hallucinating, because he was very sort of challenging of, you can't make me hallucinate, you wouldn't be able to do it. And so I made him hallucinate by telling him that I was going to make something disappear. And because people are generally unobservant, I knew that even though he'd walked into my studio flat, he'd sat down on the sofa, he'd chatted to me with his eyes open, um, he then closed his eyes and engaged in hypnosis. He'd been to my flat hundreds and hundreds of times. I knew that he would be unobservant enough to realize there's never ever been a picture on my wall. And that if I suggested that he can't see the picture on the wall, he would inevitably end up assuming that there was, as long as I come across as if I'm believing 100% that what I'm saying is true. And so by telling him that he can't see the picture on the wall, that I'm going to make it so that he can't see it anymore, he hallucinated a picture on the wall so that he could prove me wrong and prove that he can still see the picture. Um, so everyone kind of responds differently. Some people are different in how flexible they're willing to be with their reality. So you could get one person who would be willing to maybe see, for example, a dragon land in their room, like land in front of them. But someone else, that's too much of a stretch of their reality for them. But you could possibly have them imagine that a cat is climbing up onto their lap, or that a dog has just come up to their chair and has laid down on the floor beside their feet, and that they can reach down and stroke that dog. So some people are happy to hallucinate in or out of their reality. Things which are more realistic, other people aren't so happy to do that. But with practice, even people that aren't very good at hallucinating can start to learn to hallucinate. It's harder to do just with self hypnosis. It's often easier when you've got someone who can guide you through it. I've never made someone obviously see something turn to gold. It's never cropped up. And I talked about a lot of the sort of techniques for doing these things in my Hypnotic Assassin novel, where I kind of made sure all the hypnosis was accurate. Yes, I noticed it's smaller when it's next to my name, but then I can't see that the fox is a fox, even though I know it is. Um, yeah, if you've ever done the Gansfeld thing where you put ping pong balls on your eyes and shut out all sensory experience. So the idea of using the ping pong balls is that it creates like a relatively flat, just bit of incoming whatever light there is, ambient light in the background. You have ping pong balls over your eyes, half a ping pong ball over each eye, so that you make it so that you don't have any sensory, or as little sensory input as possible. And you often start hallucinating when you do that. Um, but also, if you're in a room where there's no sound, there's nothing that can mark out time, uh, you can easily end up uh, having really, well, definitely having time distortion of time seeming significantly longer, especially if you end up um, not talking to yourself in your mind that much. So if you have moments where you just decide, for example, right, I'm just going to sleep for a minute, you might sleep, wake up, and because you've got no reference for time, you don't know if you've just slept for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, or 8 hours. You've got no kind of concept of any of that. And what normally happens is you actually just end up napping, but you think that you keep sleeping for hours and hours and hours. So you can end up sort of saying, oh, I think that I'm now 10 hours in to whatever the experience is. when actually you're maybe 30 minutes in. How can you struggle with digestives? You've got to eat them whole. I can't imagine. I always think it's weird when I see someone like dunk a biscuit and then just bite it, because I think, what about the rest of the biscuit? It's going to break. It's going to go everywhere. It's going to make mess. It's kind of, a biscuit is a one dunk thing. It's like dunk it, whole thing in your mouth. Um, I don't know where the chewing comes in. Well, I think there's lots of reasons that people hallucinate. Under extreme stress, obviously people can hallucinate. I don't think it's necessarily like a crossing of wires kind of thing, but your brain might be on overdrive a bit with certain areas. Um, Generally, so one problem that stage hypnotists have had is that people who are highly responsive to hypnosis, and especially to visualizing and things like that, and hallucinating, are generally people who also struggle a lot with things ranging from schizophrenia, um, bipolar, people who struggle a lot with anxiety, things like phobias, post traumatic stress disorder. So, people who can buy into the reality they create in their mind. So, for someone, for example, to um, be able to make themselves panic, they have to be able to represent something in their mind to the extent. So, not what I'm not talking about panic when it's a legitimate, uh, scary situation. I'm panicking now, but panicking about, for example, public speaking. Me sitting here and suddenly panicking about public speaking means I'm doing something in my head that's realistic enough to trigger my body to respond as if it's in the real threat situation, even though it's not in that threat situation. And the trouble is that those are the kind of people that are very, very good at being hypnotized. And so they're the people that pass all of the tests that a stage hypnotist will do and are more likely to be the people who end up on stage. And that also means that the people who end up on stage are generally the most vulnerable people in terms of how they could respond, that they're the people who are more prone to end up gaining some potentially negative outcome. And so, even if a hypnotist isn't doing anything inherently wrong, there's a higher chance that something bad could happen in relation to someone. So, you cause someone trauma completely accidentally. Um, People who really struggle to have any kind of inner experience are generally less likely to be good hypnotic subjects in the first place, in the traditional sense of trying to have people visualize stuff and whatever, um, because there are things you can do, obviously, that don't involve that. But they're also less likely to have things like anxiety and panicking about things prior to being in a situation, because they just can't create that for themselves in their mind. Um, but what can happen, obviously, is that if you're under extreme stress, your survival kicks in potentially because your body is saying there's a threat. And part of the process of the survival of having the high anxiety is the whole sort of visualizing and making a representation inside yourself so that you avoid that in the future. So you could end up potentially hallucinating. Maybe that's just sort of my guess, or one guess, because I've not looked to see if there's any research on it. But it could be that something like that's happening, that's putting your brain into a point where it's just more prone to hallucinate, because that's what the brain is designed to kind of do under certain circumstances. It's designed to create an internal representation of the external threat. Your first fox icon was worse. My mouth is more like a baleen whale. Yeah, I have frequently had it where, well, I have terrible time distortion all the time. For me, it's that I think an incredibly short amount of time has passed. So the common thing for me is that I think an incredibly short amount of time has passed and then realize that an enormous amount of time has passed. So I can easily start the day. So I'll walk Abby to work, say in the morning. I'll be home by 9 a.m. and I'll then think, right, let's crack on with some work. And I'll think that it's 10 a.m. and I'll see that it's 5 to 5 and that I should already have left to go and meet Abby. And I'll think, all I've done is sat down for a couple of seconds and got a bit of work done. I've barely done anything. I've barely even started. Where's all the day gone? Um, and it is so ridiculously extreme. So I don't know if others have the same experience, but it is so extreme that just hours and hours and hours can go by. But if you ask me subjectively how long I think that time period has been, I would tell you probably 30 minutes. And if I'm saying 30 minutes, I probably mean 15, but I think that 15 probably is wrong. So I'll say 30. I've had the experience. So the main, in terms of hallucinations, like natural hallucinations that I've ever had, the main one I've had is hearing people's names called out. I've been in places where I've all of a sudden heard someone's name called out, like from upstairs or something, um, where it sounds like someone shouting almost their own name in their own voice. Um, and I've had that reasonably frequently, I would say, where I just suddenly hear someone kind of shout out their name in their voice, uh, from another room, from upstairs, from over the road or something if I'm walking along, from somewhere just behind me. I'm doing that thing where I'm trying to keep scrolling to look at what everyone's saying to get to the bottom of the list. Um, but then it jumps. Yeah, I frequently, um, again, not hallucinating, and I put it down to because I'd heard it from a number of different autistic people having a similarish experience, and I included it in my autobiography. Um, so I put it down to possibly being autistic. That I have zoned out before. And for example, I used to get buses to and from work all the time. And I would literally have absolutely no idea where I am. I'd look out the window and think, I can't figure out where this location is. I can't recognize any of the scenery to know exactly where I am and whether I've passed where I'm going or not. I don't know how much time has elapsed. Have I been on this bus for like 2 hours? Have I been on this bus for, you know, 10 minutes? And I would literally have no idea where I am. And that kind of experience happens to me reasonably frequently as well, where I can walk out onto a street and I've got absolutely no, I just don't recognize a single thing around me. I could be anywhere at all and I wouldn't, I just literally have no idea. Even if it's an incredibly familiar location, I don't see any of it as familiar. I don't recognize a single thing in that location. And it takes me a little while to kind of almost come back to reality and think, oh, right, yeah, I recognize something now. My assumption has always been that probably because I can barely see anything in my mind's eye, and I almost never see anything in my mind's eye. I've always just assumed that was the default setting, and that because nearly everyone I've ever hypnotized has ended up saying, "Oh, I can't visualize," when I've kind of talked to them about the experience. So a lot of people I've hypnotized have been on training courses and things, and we'll sort of explore the experience people are having, and they'll say, "Oh, I can't really visualize, so I couldn't picture what you were saying, but I just had a sense of what it was that you were talking about, and I just followed along with having a sense of everything, and this was my kind of experience." And so I had always assumed that people who can see something in their mind's eye kind of voluntarily or by closing in their, so not talking about when you're just dreaming, but um voluntarily by closing your eyes and then visualizing something, I always thought they were in the minority, that they're the incredibly lucky, fortunate few people. Um, and I've always just done everything assuming that no one that ever does it, follows anything I say, is able to visualize, apart from maybe a fraction of a percent who are incredibly lucky. Um, Milton Erickson had this thing where he was asked, "What do you do if you're in a car with a driver who's going down a busy street that's kind of all chaotic?" And he said, "I always make sure they're hypnotized so that they drive as best as they can, because obviously when you're hypnotized, you're in a state of heightened awareness. You're far more aware of uh, things than normal. So obviously that's far more aware of things that you're focusing on than normal. So if someone's driving and they're in a trance in terms of driving, like a race driver, they're going to be hyper aware of every single little piece of the process of the driving they're doing. So they're going to make much better decisions rather than normal everyday awareness, as Erickson would talk about it, which is you're not really paying proper attention to anything. You're kind of driving along, but at the same time, you're thinking about what you need to pick up to take home for dinner. You're also thinking about what you've done earlier, what you've got to do next, who you've next got to go and pick up, uh, perhaps trying to listen to what the passenger's saying. If it's, say, driving with a passenger, trying to listen to what the passenger's saying, trying to think about what it is you're going to say in response to what the passenger's saying. You're not paying attention to driving. You're not like giving 100% undivided attention to the thing that you're supposed to be doing. um, I frequently, with a handful of people I know who are happy, it's very rare to find people who will voluntarily hypnotize me, unfortunately. Um, but with people I know who will hypnotize me, I've frequently done the whole thing of, and some of it's on YouTube and in books and things. Done the whole thing of right, hypnotize me and talk to me when I'm not consciously involved in giving any answers, so that you can get a nice, clear kind of what kind of answers will my brain come up with if I'm not filtering it with my assumptions, because we make a lot of assumptions about things. So if I take all my assumptions away and just let my brain answer openly and honestly without the assumptions that I put on top of it, then what will it say? And I've done that with people where I've hypnotized them and then asked them questions while they're hypnotized to see what kind of answers they give. And I've had people hypnotize me and do the same with me. Hypnotize me and then see what answers I give when I'm not making assumptions to kind of filter my answers in certain directions that I'm not even aware I'm making. Um, so yeah, I find that quite interesting to gain a bit of a look at what answers people come up with. Yeah, I don't think I've ever been bored. I don't know. I kind of get confused at how to be bored. I try and think. how on earth does someone manage to get bored? Because there's never enough time in any day to do everything that you want to do. And there's never enough time in any day to do nothing either. I would love to be able to spend days literally doing nothing, sitting down, doing absolutely nothing at all. And I can never find enough time to do it. Yet these chats, I think, go on for 3 hours or so, but that's not in my head. It's never 3 hours. I do think a large part of it is that when I focus on something, I get laser focused on it normally. And that means that I stop being aware of anything around that. Hello, Daniel. Still doing that thing of having to scroll back up again now. I started reading something. Do I meet someone and almost drool at the idea of hypnotizing them because I know they'd be a great subject? Um, no, but definitely through a large chunk of my life, I don't think I'd ever met anyone who I hadn't hypnotized as a way of practicing my skills and practicing my communicate. Well, from the point of view of my perspective was I was practicing my communication skills. I was practicing making sure that I could interact with people in an adequate way. So doing all the usual stuff that people do instinctively that if you're autistic you don't do instinctively. So I would kind of, and this doesn't go for people necessarily who I'm meeting and interacting with. This is people who are perhaps within, I don't know, maybe a 10 or 20-meter circle of me, if I'm static, so like in a cafe or something, where I would match someone's breathing, I would match their posture, I would start. So this is all stuff that people do automatically that you learn to do when you're a child growing up. I would start kind of implanting thoughts in their mind. I would start trying to get a sense of what it's like to be them by matching them as much as I can. I would practice things like checking that I could see their pulse so I could work out, what their pulse currently is, work out how their pulse changes over time and whether they're seeming to get more stressed or more relaxed or whatever it happens to be. I would look at things like trying to observe for the changes to their lips to see if more blood flow is coming to their lips or less blood flow. I would be observing for the changes to the color of their cheeks to see again if there's more or less blood flow going to their cheeks. I'd be looking for all the usual kind of signs that most people just instinctively have learned to recognize. And because they have learned at such a young age through normal childhood development, most people are unaware of all this stuff on a conscious level because they haven't learned it as an adult. They learned it growing up at an instinctive level, and they don't have any necessarily have any awareness of how to do or what to observe for. Um, so I would do all of that, and work colleagues have always been people that I would uh, kind of influence with hypnosis, um, especially the ones who would challenge me and be very horrible and negative towards me. So it could be giving them toothache as a demonstration that this thing that they're having a go at me and saying is complete rubbish or the work of the devil or whatever. Here's the work of the devil, just to let you know it works. Um, or making people forget things or making people write. So this is all stuff I used to do years ago. Making people write swear words into reports. So they'd be writing by hand, or they could be nowadays be typing, but in those days, all the reports were written by hand. So they'd be writing by hand, and they'd end up writing swear words into their reports. all the usual kind of stuff that you're doing just to practice, to make sure that literally you're obsessing about trying to master what it is that you're doing. Yeah, I've occasionally had obviously hallucinations at the point of falling asleep, which is reasonably common. Common as in common among people, not common as in necessarily common among one individual, although some individuals might be. Yet neighbours are a big loud bang. Yes, Daniel, I decided, rather than having to set literally everything up, I was explaining at the beginning, the whole kind of, oh, I'm going to have to set up unplug the PlayStation 5 from the TV, plug it into my game capture device, plug the game capture device into the TV, plug the game capture device into the computer, set up OBS. I thought, or I could just have a night where I literally just go to YouTube, go to the simple setting, not the OBS setting, and just go live for a bit and answer any questions and engage with people. Um, so yes, glad to see you here. Yep, writing is like self-hypnosis, and I would say that he probably did mean it literally, whether he thought he did or not. I'm trying to get to the bottom. More writing gets added faster than I can read. I talk out loud to myself a lot. I would say that most things I feel, I'm not depressed, but most things I feel, my life experience is largely bland. I would say beige would be the color of my life experience. Yeah, I was asked, I think the other day, somebody who completed her degree recently said to me, so, because I was obviously, I hadn't seen this person since before the whole global pandemic situation. And I've written a book since then. So I sort of was asked, how long does it take? How much can you kind of write, say, in a day? And I was like, well, if I had to get something written, probably, well, the most I've done, I think, is 27,000 words in a day. Um, and that was back when I used to type incredibly slowly. That was back in the days when I used to type like one finger at a time, one thing at a time. Now I can type very, very fast compared to then. So I've absolutely no idea if I actually put in a whole day's work rather than like 6 hours or something, how much I'd write. I have definitely written um, over recent years, easily written 20,000 words in a day, working significantly less hours than I did to get the 27,000 words in the day that I did back in like 2007 or something. You don't need necessarily good eyesight to see pulse, depending where you're looking and what the person's doing. So if someone has one leg on top of the other, their foot will bounce up and down, literally like a pendulum on a grandfather clock. it can't be missed. So the foot will bounce up and down in time with their pulse if they have one leg on top of the other, especially if it's one knee essentially on top of the other. Um, for breathing, that's even easier because breathing, literally the entire body moves enormously in and out. The nostrils move with the breathing. And if someone's talking, you obviously know exactly when they're breathing because if they're saying words like I am now, air is coming out while the words are being said. And just like then, when they pause, air goes in while they pause before saying the next sentence or the next bit of sentence. So you can obviously hear it as well. You can hear the person breathing. So when I used to do before Skype and all these kind of things, and before I had internet, I would do therapy via the telephone sometimes. And to do therapy over the phone, I would have to shut my eyes so I could really focus on the sounds going on in my ear to try and work out what's the breathing of this individual who I'm on the phone with, what's the environment they're in, can I pick up anything about the way there's sound in the environment, like can I hear traffic in the background, can I work out what the environment is like, what the room's like, can I work out what kind of sized room the room is and how the room's laid out by the echo of the voice in the room. And I'd really try and focus as much as I can on what I can hear and all the sort of auditory information so that I can then try and make a picture of, okay, so there's bound to be um, lots in the room because there's no echo, for example, lots of furniture, curtains, um, books, things that are dumbing down the sound a bit. Maybe I can hear some slight distant traffic and I can then work out how much traffic to try and work out what kind of road maybe they're on. But you'd have to do it all just really focusing and listening. And I used to sit on the seafront when I lived in Bognor and close my eyes and just try and observe with my ears everyone walking past and try and work out what they look like what height they are, what kind of mood they're going to look like they're in just from hearing their footsteps. So obviously someone who's angry is going to be more tense, so their footsteps are going to sound different to someone who's jolly and happy and maybe a bit more springy and softer in their footsteps. So you can start to sort of work out, maybe someone's walking in a way that makes them sound like perhaps they're more down and they're more ploddy. They're not stompy, they're not like as if they're putting down feet that are heavy and solid. They're just more kind of lethargic in their footsteps. So I would try and work out as much as I can about the person and their exact location in space as well. So I would have met up from the minute I could start hearing them. I try and work out where they are so that I can open my eyes and I would try and face my head to exactly where I think they're going to be at the point that I open my eyes, so that I can open my eyes and try and look at them directly to see that I've figured out where in space they are around me as well. And so all the usual kind of, if you want to become a therapist, all the stuff that you do to be a therapist, all the stuff that a therapist practices and practices as much as they can every day to try to get as good as they can at it so that you can start doing it more instinctively with clients in therapy. Yeah, I'm definitely not a fan of loud and sudden noises. Fortunately, I don't get panic attacks from it, but I have known people who do, and it's obviously very difficult. It's kind of the anticipation that's the thing. And I find for me, loud noises, when I hear a loud noise, for me, I normally just get hit with an instant anger at the noise. Um, Yeah, I'm happy to get dressed up in makeup and stuff as long as it makes people smile or makes people back away from me. I think, okay, we'll avoid him. I think it's odd if someone didn't talk to themselves. Yeah, obviously, I've sent lots of people to sleep by breathing the same as them. And it's a technique I used to teach a lot to parents for parents to send their kids to sleep. That what you don't want to do as a parent is get into an argument with your child about bedtime and then end up with your child now being kind of hyper in terms of the emotional level, um, because you've instilled that in them by choosing to argue with them and try to make them anxious and stressed and angry at bedtime when you want them to sleep. Um, what you do instead is just breathe the same as them and then start putting yourself to sleep so that you start doing the breathing pattern once you've built rapport so that they're following your lead. So you start off matching them and then you have it so that they start following what you're doing. And then because they're following your breathing pattern, you then start slowing your breathing down, start relaxing and slumping your shoulders, start putting yourself to sleep. And as you put yourself to sleep, because they're following your breathing, they start breathing in a way that's more sleepy to the point where they end up falling asleep because of the breathing that they're doing. And you haven't had to say anything about bedtime and going to sleep. And it's one of the main ways that I hypnotize people as well. That if it's face to face, the main way I will be hypnotizing someone is by matching their breathing and then leading them to a point where before we even start talking about hypnosis, if we ever do end up talking about hypnosis, they are already well and truly gone. They're already highly responsive to my non-verbal communication, and anything I choose to say is just kind of almost lip service. It's just you're expecting hypnosis and you're thinking of what hypnosis is someone saying, okay, close your eyes and do this. So if I say close your eyes and do this, I'm doing that for your benefit, not because it's necessary. I'm doing it so that you think you've got what you came here for. But in reality, what you came here for, you've already got. This bit is just so that you have that sense that you've got what you came for. Um, and so I'll match the person's breathing and then lead their breathing. There's a paper by Milton Erickson where he talks about how he hypnotizes people in this way. He hypnotizes people. So he would be teaching a lecture and a demonstration subject would come up and they'd be sat opposite him and then he would hypnotize them and he would do it through his breathing. So again, he would say things for their benefit, but he's doing it for their benefit, not because it's necessary. He's doing it because he has this feeling like, oh, they kind of want this to make it so they think, oh, that's the hypnosis. Um, so he would breathe the same as them and then send them lead them and then they would go into hypnosis. And he said in this paper that he wrote, two psychiatrists took home the recording, the audio recording from one of his lectures, and one of them, their child said, "Daddy, why is that man breathing that person to sleep?" And the dad, the psychiatrist, said, "Don't be silly. That's not what he's doing." And then, so kids pick up on these things. And so then at the next lecture, this psychiatrist said to Milton Erickson, "Oh, you never guess the really stupid thing that my child said to me. My child said to me when I was reviewing the audio recording of of the last session, that you were breathing that client to sleep. You're breathing the demonstration subject into hypnosis." And Milton Erickson said, "Well, yes, that's exactly what I was doing." And the 4-year old or whatever it was, or 5-year old, picked up on the breathing that was being done and picked up that that's what was taking place. And yet the adults who were actually present watching with their own eyes, who had a lot more information, didn't notice at all. Because I've noticed this when working with children, that children will end up doing like a double breath to break that rapport. They'll notice that you're leading their breathing, and if they're not ready to go with it, they'll go and they'll just do one extra breath to snap themselves separate from your matching of their breathing, and because they'll notice that something's going on. The good thing is that kids obviously can also learn these techniques themselves to use. Yeah, I've just moved forward my next jab. I was contacted today to be told that I could have the jab, the second jab, early. I was going to have to wait till the 30th. Now I've got it on the 13th. The other one is obviously you can cross match. So I will, you can do something like, for example, stroke on a child's arm or on their head or whatever in time with their breathing. So you like stroke up when they breathe in, down when they breathe out. And then once you know that the stroking and the breathing have synchronized, then all you do is stroke downwards longer than you stroke up. And their breathing when you stroke down will keep breathing out to follow the downstroke. So obviously, if you do it all the way down for like much longer breath, then they'll think, yeah, I can't breathe out that much. But if you just do it slightly longer, you trigger essentially longer out breaths and in breaths in the child, and or it could be in anyone. So it could be with your partner, for example. While your partner's sleeping, you could stroke their back and stroke their back in time with their breathing, and then extend the stroking downwards when they breathe out, so that you start making their out breath slightly longer, so that they drift deeper and deeper, relaxed. Um, to some extent, hypnosis and doing things like mentally rehearsing or whatever can help in relation to it can help in relation to the panic part, but the initial jump part is the bit that it can't do much about, because obviously your survival response is loud bang, could be threat, jump. So that specific part of it obviously is hard to do something about. So I had someone come to me once and say, I've got fear of loud noises. And I said, okay, explain to me this fear of loud noises. And they said, when there's a loud noise, I jump. I said, okay, then what happens? And they said, no, that's it. I'm fine after that, but I just don't want to jump. And I said, well, that's perfectly normal. The jumping is normal. That literally is what you're supposed to do when you hear a loud noise. I said, everyone does that. Even I do that. And so her response was, oh, so you're telling me you need help with it as well? I said, no, I don't need help with it. It's literally the natural response to hearing a loud noise is to jump. Where it's a problem is obviously if you then have panic, or if you have panic beforehand or anything like that, that part's the problem. But the actual, a loud noise has happened and I jump, that's kind of the normal part. And her response was, well, the queen never jumps, and if the queen doesn't jump, it's not normal to jump. And so obviously, yeah, that was her view. But things like mental rehearsal can help, so you can kind of mentally rehearse responding in a certain way. Implementation intentions can help, where you tell yourself something like, um, if I think there's going to be a loud noise, then I will relax, or something like that. Obviously, I'm just kind of trying to come up with something without getting more detail, trying to come up with something off the top of my head. But you want something that's kind of like, if this happens, then I will respond in this way. And the if part is something that is specific. So something, so like, I don't know, if I start, and the other thing with implementation intentions, which I love implementation intentions, I think they're incredible kind of way the brain works. The thing with them is they're most effective when they require the least work. So, for example, if you say, if there's a distraction, then I will ignore it, that implementation will work better because ignoring means doing nothing. And we're very good, if we have the choice, at doing absolutely nothing. So if there's a distraction, then I will ignore it, works better than if there's a distraction, then I will focus on my work harder. So even if actually you might do the same strategy, the focusing on your work harder is an effort based thing. And that means that it's less likely to work, it's less likely to happen. So the more kind of lazy you can be about it, the better. So for example, if it was if I start noticing anxiety, then I will feel calm. Or if I start noticing anxiety, then I will ignore that anxiety in that situation. So I'm not saying in all situations, but you would say it in relation to that situation. That's more likely to work because you're essentially saying, don't bother putting any effort into this. And as I say, we're much better at not putting the effort in. Um, yeah, nowadays I very rarely have children to put to sleep, which is very, very good. And if at all possible, I do everything I can to avoid any hint of babysitting. If I can avoid children, I definitely do it. Yeah, I like that they were using the Queen as the standard. But also, the Queen has guns fired next to her an awful lot. And nearly all the footage you see of her is also in situations like that, showing off the guns being fired as well, which means it's a zoomed out image. So you can't see the very slight flinch that she might do. She may not blink or anything. She may have trained herself not to blink, but she's bound to do a very slight movement or a very slight flinch because that's normal. Jackie Chan did a DVD called My Stunts, My Story. Brilliant DVD. Anyone who likes Jackie Chan and his work, definitely watch the DVD if you haven't already. There's a double DVD that you can get. But in My Stunts, My Story, he talks about the scene from Police Cop. No, Police Story, even. Talks about the scene from Police Story where there's a bus coming around a corner and the bus comes up towards where he is, and he gets a gun out, he points the gun, and he has to shoot the gun kind of forward. And he pointed out that in the footage, you watch him fire the gun up, first of all, I think. Maybe it's in just the outtakes. But he said that the reason he fires the gun up by his ear first is because that causes him to flinch. And then when he points the gun forward, what ends up making it on film, and fires the gun, he doesn't flinch, and so he looks like more of an action star because he's fired a gun and not reacted, like, he's not sort of gone bang bang and flinched at all. And so he would fire the gun up the side of his head first to make himself flinch so that he can then instantly pull the gun back down and fire it and not show any reaction. So yes, there are things you can obviously do, but yeah, the Queen being used as the standard is interesting. I don't really know. Well, I've got two brothers who have children, Um, they, I haven't met all of. I haven't met one of the kids, or no, actually, both of those brothers. I haven't met their youngest kids. Um, but yeah, it's hopefully they don't ask me uh, or even think of me to babysit. I know one of them has thought of me to babysit, um, but I make it clear that I'm definitely not a fan of it. It would have to be a really bad emergency. And in really bad emergencies, I have done it. I had to do it last year when I missed one of the live streams. There was an emergency, and for a little while, I had to myself and Abby had to look after one of my brother's children. I knew a schizophrenic that never flinched at literally anything. He also punched straight through the fire doors of the building that I worked in. But that was more to do with the fact his medication meant that I don't think he felt anything physically. So he could punch through fire doors without kind of feeling any pain from it. Everything turned out fine. Yeah, in exactly the same place that I worked, a woman who was schizophrenic and diabetic accidentally set herself on fire and burnt to death because she couldn't feel it until it was too late to realize that she was on fire. So yeah, a lack of pain. I think her lack of pain was obviously to do with her being diabetic rather than um, necessarily to do with schizophrenia medication that she was on. I've still got my time distortion book there. Just put you back where you belong. Yeah, I could very much imagine just hypnotizing them and leaving them in a corner. Well, Darren Brown hypnotized the man at a London train station and had them then fly all the way to I can't remember where it was, maybe Morocco or somewhere, and then had them awaken in a photo booth in a shop in Morocco. So you can obviously hypnotize someone and just have them in that kind of place for a very Marrakesh. That was the one. You're right. It's Marrakesh. Have them in that place, kind of mentally, for a very long time. And then there's the one where he went and tried to break into America in terms of doing his Darren Brownie stuff, and it didn't work out. But he tried, and he did the whole, sitting up on a hill, up on like a mountainy thing, and saying to the guy, "I can make the sun disappear. I'm just going to draw a circle in front of you and rub it out 3 times. then he drew the circle, rubbed it out, drew a second circle, rubbed it out, drew the third circle, hypnotized the man, laid him down on the ground, came back at night time when the sun had set, sat the man back up into position again, finished drawing the third circle, and then clicked his fingers and said that it's gone, and it was night time. And the man had kind of obviously been there for a few hours at that point, thinking that it was instant. My dad used to use forks to try to stop people breaking into his flat. He was very annoyed one day when he found me in his flat. Yeah, if one of them wanted to learn hypnosis, I would instantly be there teaching them. My dad was very paranoid about people breaking in. It's the parents of the child that need to worry. Like if anyone has seen the Darren Brown hypnotizing Simon Pegg, where he asks Simon Pegg to write on a little bit of paper a present he would love to get, and then says, "Okay, fold that paper, put it in an envelope, and seal that so that no one can see it or mess with it." And then Darren Brown makes Simon Pegg want a BMX bike, and then says, "Okay, look at the bit of paper and see what you want. What did you really want?" And Simon Pegg says, "I really wanted a BMX bike." And he says, "Oh, okay." Reveal that bit of paper. He reveals the paper, and it says a leather jacket. So I don't know why it says a leather jacket in my handwriting. I wanted a BMX bike, and so yeah, it's a child learning it could end up doing things like that, like the parent kind of saying, having an attitude of, "I don't want to get you something," and then the child convincing them that the parent wants to get them something, like a BMX bike. Talking of Darren Brown, I remember a long time ago. This is probably the very end. No, maybe it was 2000, something like that. Darren Brown did a thing on TV where, in one of his shows, he made everyone or a large number of people in a shopping centre put their hand up in the air, and I was telling my nan and granddad about this, and Nan's reaction at the time was, "Oh, sounds rubbish. That sort of thing would never work on me." And so, sitting in the living room, I had written down, because it's the kind of thing I do, exactly what Darren Brown had been saying to get everyone to put their right hand in the air. And so I sort of turned to Nan and said, "Oh, well, this is what he said," and started kind of conversationally saying everything that Darren Brown had been saying, but adding some extra bits of conversation around it all. And then got to the bit where you say, "Come right arm up now," and Nan's right arm suddenly kind of flew up in the air, and she just sort of looked up at it and then grabbed it and pulled it back down again, kind of as if to say, "That was a bit naughty of you, grandson." Um, exactly. um, there was someone I worked with. He wasn't my favorite manager, and he was so bad as a manager, he got promoted to manager of training, where his job was to just make sure everyone had the training they were supposed to have. He used to work managing or being like the area manager of a bunch of children's homes, but he was absolutely awful at that job. He was awful at. He was a manager of children's homes initially, and he was awful at the uh, at being a manager in children's homes. He was awful as a member of staff in children's homes. He was awful as a manager in children's homes. He was awful as an area manager of children's homes. And so he was eventually promoted to a job where he didn't ever have to go into children's homes, but still had a job for some weird reason. Um, and I clashed with him whenever I saw him. If I didn't see him, it was fine. But whenever I saw him, I clashed. And I remember doing the Darren Brown thing on him of, so for those of you who've seen it, Darren Brown did a tube thing going on the London Underground where he would get on the Underground and say, do you have just a moment? What stop, thinking about it now, what stop, thinking about it now, are you getting off at? And he would make people forget what stop they were getting off at. And I did exactly the same thing, but during, I think everyone's had rubbish bosses and co-workers. I think that's kind of the default position. And if you haven't, if you find good bosses or something, Warren Street, you see, at least you remember what stop he was getting off at. He didn't remember. Maybe you should have been there instead. Although back then you would have been very young to have been there. But yeah, I think it's the exception having good co-workers and bosses. But yeah, I did exactly the same thing to this guy, where I was telling him something and just kept squeezing into the conversation. Oh, what stop, thinking about it now? What stop, thinking about it now was, and made him forget his name and why he was there and all things like that. So yeah, I didn't necessarily have the best relationship with him. I have had some really, really bad managers. I had some good managers as well. So one of my managers, I've had two managers I would say are good standout managers. One manager was at Butlins, and I've told this story before, but my first meeting with him was he came round to the back door of the pot wash to the fire exit, because he would like to make sure people were working. And so he always used to come around to the fire exits. I didn't know this till I kicked a door in his face, but he used to come around to the fire exits because that way, if there was staff kind of skiving and, trying to hide in one of the venues, like out the back of one of the venues where you're not in sight of everyone, like in the pot wash, his thinking was someone could be hiding in the pot wash, just chatting away with a few of them, trying to avoid being noticed that they're not working. And I had 2 arms full of saucers. He knocked on the fire door. So I kicked the bar that goes across the fire door to open it. It whacked him. And as the door opened, he was lying on the ground the other side of the fire door. And he then kind of stood up, said, "Hi, I'm Rab. I'm your new manager. Let's hope the next time we meet is under better circumstances." And then he walked through the venue and carried on what he was doing. He was a very good manager. He they were making some changes in my job. I was a kind of a manager of my section at the time, and the way it was working was that I was responsible for all the blame of the problems to do with that section, but I wasn't allowed to change anything to do with those problems. It was a manager one higher than me who was responsible for creating the changes, but I was the one who was responsible for being blamed if the changes weren't in place. And I was a little irritated by this, thinking that's very unfair that I get the blame for something I can't control, and the person who is in control of it doesn't have to fix it and make the changes. So I walked out. I said, I want to be demoted. He said, I don't want to demote you. I like you as a manager here. I said, well, I need to either be able to make the changes so that I don't get in trouble for something I can't change, or I want to be demoted. So at Butlins, your pay wasn't based on the position you held; it was based on how good you were at your job, and which I think is a very good way of doing work. That you get paid based on how good you are at doing your job, not based on the position you hold. So you could be a section leader getting paid less than a member of staff who pushes a trolley around, because you just don't do your job as good as the person who pushes their trolley around. And so I then said, okay, I'm off then. And so I just walked off shift. And for a couple of weeks, I I had no plan of ever going back. But for a couple of weeks, I hadn't gone back. He came around as a manager. He came around to my flat every single day, screaming up the side of the building to get my attention, because I didn't have a bell, because I didn't want people to have contact with me, because why would you? The bell was broken and I never wanted the landlord to fix it, because it was good that the bell was broken. And so he would come around to the side of the building and scream up the side of the building to try and get my attention. And after a couple of weeks, I eventually thought, I suppose I better answer him. He's been coming here every single day. It's a bit noisy, bit irritating. And he convinced me to come back into work, and he let me be demoted. I didn't have to hold the sort of section manager's role anymore. And so, yes, he was very supportive and very good. And I had a manager in one of my jobs where on the first day of meeting her, we were sat in a car going to meet my team that I was going to be having to manage of parenting workers. And she said to me, I think you're autistic. Is it okay if I treat you as someone who's autistic? And this is before I was diagnosed. And so obviously I said, yeah, that's fine. And so she was a very good manager as well. She was just direct, blunt, told me what she wanted to say, and was willing to make changes to make sure that we can get the best, kind of have the best working relationship. So yes, I've had a couple of good managers, but most I've had have not been the brightest sparks or the greatest people. I had a highly religious manager who would regularly hurt children in the care homes, and I would regularly be reporting him. Not that anything would get done, but I'd regularly be reporting him for him causing harm to the children in our care. I'd even raised with him, how on earth can he be religious and hurt children? And his thing was, well, every Sunday I go to church and I obviously ask for forgiveness for anything I've done during the week. And that kind of absolves everything, and it's fine, it's allowed. My thing was, what happens if you die on the way to church? Did you think of that one? And he, even when new staff started, would say, oh, if Dan's on shift with you, he'll make sure that he pulls you up on anything you're doing wrong. He has no problem with doing that. So nothing ever happened to him. He was just very kind of open about the fact that I'm the sort of person that will tell you that child abuse is bad. The company itself never wanted to address it in the slightest. But so I've had managers like that. That's the manager where there was one night where the manager and the senior member of staff, and I was a reasonably new member of staff at the time, were it was like 3 a.m, and I was in a doorway, wedging my arms across the doorway, facing out of the bedroom into the corridor, with the manager and the senior member of staff pushing on my body, trying to push past me, with me clinging on as tight as I could, not to let them into the bedroom, with the teenager behind me saying, out the way, Dan, out the way, Dan, I can have him, I can have him. And the two senior staff, the manager and the senior member of staff beneath them, leaning on the front of me saying, out the way, Dan, out the way, Dan, we're going to deal with him. And me sort of like, I should be facing the other way. I'm supposed to be stopping the teenager hurting people, not the staff hurting the teenager. And that same teenager, they rubbed his face on gravel, and the teenager's view was, oh, I deserved it. I had been horrible to them. And my view was, whether you're horrible to them or not, this is kind of their job. and your face isn't supposed to get rubbed in gravel, regardless of how horrible you've been to them. And having a kind of mentality, as I know a lot of people with domestic abuse situations have as well, where people just fall into the kind of, oh, it's my fault. If I didn't upset them, then that wouldn't have happened. Or they blame themselves for something that is not their fault in the slightest. And I sort of raised with him that he shouldn't have the mentality that this is in any way his fault. His behavior is terrible. He shouldn't have done his behavior, but that doesn't mean he deserved to be hurt in any way and have his face rubbed in gravel. And I raised that with the management that ran the whole company, and they threatened to sack me for it, for not having, team, whatever you call it, team sticking together and all that rubbish, and not sort of being willing to stick by my team, when it was like, actually, I'm not here for my team. I'm here to make sure children don't get hurt and are protected and have a good start in life. Well, that's ideally what I'm here for. So yes, I've had some bad managers, but then had some good ones. Very few good ones, but have had some. Yeah, unfortunately, people who hurt children normally are the people who want to be near children, and so normally they get the jobs with children. Yeah, the guy that set up the children's home company that I was just talking about, he set it up because social services wouldn't let him be a foster carer. So, out of spite for social services not letting him be a foster carer, he set up a children's home, or set up a children's home company, and then had a number of different children under his care. And I really didn't get on well with the director either. I didn't get on well with many of these people. Yeah, my view is de-escalation is a very key thing that people should do in all these kind of jobs. Um, I've been kicked, punched, stabbed, strangled, hung, thrown over banisters, hit with cricket bats, baseball bats, had rocks and stones thrown at me, and bricks thrown at me, fire extinguishers thrown at me, um, boiling things poured down my t-shirt, all sorts of things, and never once resorted to any kind of violence, anger, um, losing my temper, anything like that, because that's not what you do in those situations. Your job is to remain respectful of the person and to continue to demonstrate that you're in control of you and your actions. And the same when I've worked with parents, and parents say, oh, well, smacking isn't bad. Smacking's never done me any harm. Well, just because smacking hasn't done someone any harm doesn't mean smacking is right. I could say, I got punched in the face as a kid. It didn't do me any harm. Well, it doesn't make being punched in the face a right thing to happen. So assault is assault. And if you end up so I'll end up sort of saying to parents, what's the context where you've thought that smacking is the right response to have had? And they'll say things like, well, what if the child went to run across a busy road? You stop them. You don't smack them. Yeah, but when you stop them, you have to smack them to say, don't do that again. No, you stop them and tell them, don't do it again. You don't have to smack them to tell them that. And people will say, yeah, but it's the only way to build respect. Well, respect comes from mutual trust and understanding. It doesn't come from fear. That's called being scared. And, I spent a lot of time when I was working with parents having to try and explain all of this, that there's a big difference between being assertive and being aggressive. There's a big difference between having respect and having fear. And the same with so there's a video. I used to teach a parenting course, and on the parenting course there's real video footage that's used of real families, One of the videos that's used has this dad proudly say on the video that uh, so what ends up happening is there's two young children, and the daughter takes something of the son's, and the son then hits the daughter and takes it back. And then the dad comes into the room hearing the daughter crying and says, "What happened?" "Oh, he just hit me." And the dad smacks the son and says, "Don't hit your sister." And then on the video, the parents are asked, "What did you just see happen?" So this footage is real footage, cameras in the house all set up, real footage. "What did you see happen?" And the dad very proudly said, "Well, I made sure that my son knows that he's not supposed to hit his sister, that that's wrong to do." And the dad is asked, "So why do you think your son hit his sister?" "So I don't know." He said that it's because she took something of his, but you don't hit your sister. And it took ages for him to grasp that she did something wrong, and so he hit the sister because she did something wrong. Dad comes in and hits the son because he did something wrong. The child was literally just doing exactly as the dad taught him to do, which is when someone does something wrong, you hit them because they did something wrong. That's what the dad was teaching. And the dad took ages to kind of grasp that. But when the penny dropped, it was like, I'd never even thought about my behavior in that kind of way. I'd never thought about my behavior as, me hitting them because they did something wrong means I'm teaching them that you hit people when they do something wrong. Yeah, they often are some of the more disrespectful people who say that they're more respectful. But then you find that obviously in all walks of life, that the people who claim something, like, for example, the religious peoples, I'm not saying all religious people, but the religious people who are highly kind of judgmental and bigoted and all these sort of things, who will say that they follow a God of peace and love and kindness and love thy neighbor and all these sort of things, and yet they're turning on all the on immigrants, and they're turning on people of color and all these other things, and it totally mismatches with what they claim to be. So there's a lot of people that, whether it's some of the older generation, not all older generation again, but some of the older generation that will say, which is true, a lot of people were smacked years ago, um, but times hopefully have moved on, that will say, well, it didn't do me any harm. I have greater respect for the police. I have greater respect for teachers. Teachers can't lay down the law nowadays and all that kind of rubbish. Whereas some of the best teachers are the best teachers because they don't spend all their time being sort of abusive to the children. They gain respect from the children, and the children love being in their classes. Yeah, it is very difficult. When I was a child, I was very, very regularly hit. And I always sort of thought, I wish I was able to kind of stand up and say something. But I always felt that because I was a very small child, I always felt I was too small to say something. That if I said something to someone who's already willing to hit me when I'm not doing anything wrong, what would they do if I started being really antagonistic and telling them that they're doing things wrong? Yet there is also the whole thing of people who think they're doing good can often be the ones who are doing some of the most horrible stuff. But then a way to look at it, especially, for example, the sort of work I've done has meant that you have to work with some really horrific people who've done some really horrific things, and you have to show them as much love and kindness and respect as you would to anyone else, um, regardless of what they do, what they say to you, etc. And some staff I know have really found that difficult. For example, you'd work with teenagers that have very violently and horribly sexually abused babies, and you have to show them exactly the same kind of behavior as you would to someone who essentially is like the perfect teenager, had the perfect behaviors and everything. You can't kind of treat them in any kind of horrible way. And some staff, especially parents, which is, I can understand why, but especially parents would really struggle, especially with the teenagers that would boast and talk about it in graphic detail to try and make you get really emotional about what they've done and what they're saying to you. And so I can understand why some people would really struggle with it. But you kind of have to get over that and get into a habit of, this is just a human being, and regardless of what they've done, my role is to treat them with kindness, with respect, to make sure that I'm trying to help them to become a better person in the future, regardless of the person they've been in the past. That I don't like what they've done, but my role isn't to try and isn't to get me worked up over what they've done. It's to just treat them with kindness and respect, and to try and help them to have the best start in life. And I think that's something that some people in all sort of walks of life find really difficult to do. Yeah, I know some who have definitely turned around. One difficulty, that's something that I've often raised because of the background I've had, is when do people turn on someone? So, for example, if a 10-year-old, if a 10-year-old is in your care, say you're fostering them, thinking of adopting them, you're working in a care home, whatever it happens to be, and you see their file and you see the horrendous abuse that they've undergone, you probably think, oh, poor 10-year-old, I want to look after them, I want to help them, I want to give them a positive experience of a way forward in life. But if that 10-year-old now becomes a 14-year-old who is now abusing children, do you still think the same about them? This exactly same person who 4 years earlier, you saw their file, you saw the abuse they underwent, you saw how difficult their childhood was, you saw, you got very protective over them and really wanted to make sure that nothing like that would happen to them again, etc. But 4 years later, the same child is around and they're doing the abuse themselves. If you just see that person, this is kind of what I would end up pointing out to people who didn't know how they could handle the kind of work that I do. But my view is, if you see that person, why should they suddenly be now treated as a different human being? As, oh no, you're an evil monster because of what you've done, kind of attitude, when 4 years earlier you would treat them as, you're a poor victim who needs a lot of help and support. So the only difference is that at some point over those 4 years, they started doing the thing that was kind of representative of what had happened to them. But they're still the same person. They're still that same child who needed the support, needed the help, needed to overcome trauma and all these other bits and pieces. But which person you see can bias the way you choose to treat them, whether you decide they just need to be locked up and castrated and all these other things that people might say, or they need to be helped and try to make them change their ways. And that's not to say that some people aren't people who you just think, no, what's right for society is that person just needs to be locked up because they're always a danger. So it's not kind of taking a rosy view of everything, but it's saying that you don't instantly, it's not helpful to instantly jump on the they need to be locked up for life kind of bandwagon, when actually that same individual, if you became aware of who they were a little bit earlier, you may have had a vastly different opinion of them, because you would see them perhaps as a victim rather than as the person committing the whatever it happens to be, the various offence or crime. So my view is very much make sure that people are safe, obviously, but at the same time, rehabilitation and helping people to overcome problems, to move forward from problems, to have a chance to change their behaviors, all these sort of things should definitely be a large part of any interaction. But obviously, the whole point I was making is that regardless of the bond, it's that the way someone gets treated can depend on how you're interacting with them. Like if you knew them as a 10-year-old who was a victim, that's the cycle of abuse. That's different to if you know them as, say, the 14-year-old who is now the abuser. Um, but the 14-year-old who's the abuser is still the 10-year-old who needed help. It's just that they've done other things, had more life since then, and some of that life has been very negative. But then there are people who are just into power and control and who go out of their way to kind of, just want to control everyone. So it's not about necessarily that they've been abused in those cases. It's that they just want to be able to have power over other people, and abuse is one of their ways of having power over others. And those people normally end up, well, they definitely need to be monitored, if not locked up, if it's going to be the only way to make society safe. So you do have to have some level of making society safe, but at the same time, the focus should be on how can you best help that person as well as society. Although at the same time, just because something that obviously I think a lot of therapists seem to overlook is that just because someone's been abused doesn't mean that they'll be an abuser, but statistically, a lot of people who've been an abuser have been abused. So, for example, I'm not an abuser, but I was hit as a child. I would regularly be hit with wooden rulers, with slippers, with whips. I'd regularly be punched or thrown at things. And my view at the time was, this is wrong. I would never want anyone to go through anything like this. So my mentality was entirely, there is no way I would ever want be an abuser. And I literally go so far the other way that, for example, with Abby, I'm always worrying, have I been too forward? Have I said something that could be taken as being abusive? Even though I literally never do or say anything, hopefully, that's abusive. So I've kind of gone too far the other way in some respects. But at the same time, I had counselling years and years ago after I got ran over, and I lost my job because of being ran over, and I couldn't find more work because the type of job I was doing was a very niche, specific job, and I couldn't do it because of my injuries, and so I wasn't trained to do anything else, and I didn't know how to transfer my skills, and so I was getting quite sort of down about this, and so I was told, you got to go and see a counsellor because they'll help you. And my thing was, I actually didn't want to see the counsellor. I wanted Job Centre to help me. I said, I want the Job Centre to be able to sit down with me, because they are the Job Centre, and to look at how my skills can be transferred, because I get very rigid thinking. I'm stuck thinking in one rigid spot, but someone else outside my head might see, Dan, those skills you've got, actually, you could apply them here, there, and in this other situation. I think you'd be brilliant at that. And it'd be things I probably have never thought of. So I wanted the Job Centre to sit down and do that with me. But the Job Centre at the time said, you have to be unemployed for 2 years before we do that sitting down with you and helping you to get into work. And my thinking was, well, that's illogical. Doesn't it cost the government money to have me unemployed for 2 years before you start trying to get me into work? I'm telling you I want to get into work now. I'm telling you I want help with this now. Can't you just do this? And they said, go to counselling. You need counselling. So I went to counselling, and the counsellor said, tell me about your relationship with your family. I obviously am very open, and I openly said, "Oh, I was hit with whips and with shoes and slippers and wooden rulers and all the rest of it." So I told the counsellor everything, and the counsellor said, "Oh, you're a danger to children because you're obviously destined to become an abuser." And I was like 27 or whatever at the time. Said, "You're destined to become an abuser." And I was like, "Well, it's a bit late telling me that now. I've literally just come out of, I can't work doing the job I was doing. I've just come out of working in children's homes for like 5 or 6 years. I should have been told 5 or 6 years ago that I was not allowed to work with children because I might be an abuser. It's no good telling me that now, 6 years later. It's a bit late now." I said, Where's that logic come from?" They said, "Well, you've been abused. If you're abused, it means you're going to be an abuser when you're older. So you're destined to be an abuser. And so you can't work with children. I'm going to write down that I recommend you don't work with children or in the care profession." And so I kind of had my opinion on her counselling and her abilities, and she refused to work with me ever again. And that was the last I worked with her for that counselling session. But it was kind of like the most rigid, this is what my teaching tells me, so it's what I'm going to say everyone has. So yeah, it is more common that people who are abused become abused. People who are abusers have been abused, but it's not obviously a statement that people who have been abused become abusers. So it's kind of getting that way around the right way. I assume she probably is still practicing. Well, I'm glad you weren't able to hit your kid. And that's the thing. Some people, in fact, my opinion is most people actually take it that way. Most people um, don't go on to be abusers, but those who do predominantly end up abusing, did experience abuse. They just weren't fortunate through their life experiences, whether it was their attitude to their experiences or whether it's uh, people around them. If you've got some good role models somewhere in your life or people you can turn to, some people just haven't had anything to be able to, not even themselves, to guide them on a better path. Which is why I also think it's incredibly useful if schools, which they don't do, but if schools would teach some of these things in school, teach what is abuse, what isn't abuse, teach about power and control in relation to relationships and about respect, teach the difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness. Um, a lot of things that I think should be taught in school are not taught in school, unfortunately. A lot of things that people need to know for life. I think kids need to learn about finances, about debt, about things like credit cards and loans, what they are and how they work. So this is sort of teenagers now, like young teenagers, um, because they don't normally have any real idea. And then you get offered a credit card and you get sort of think, you can have this money to spend now and just pay it off in the future. And you don't really give it much thought. And then you suddenly end up in debt. And then you end up getting more in debt to try and pay off the debt you've got already. And before you know it, you're young and already have a cycle of debt. Or you end up in relationships and you end up kind of in an abusive relationship, not realizing it's abusive. I think critical thinking needs to be taught, not just like when you're at degree level. If you go and do a degree, obviously critical thinking is generally part of the degree, learning how to analyze data and how to think critically and how to not just jump to assumptions and all that sort of stuff. But that needs to be taught when you're much younger. Being taught how to think critically about things, how to be able to weigh up information, data, how to weigh up facts and know what to add more weight to and less weight to. Um, Yep, I think a lot of that behaviour is bad as well. And I remember seeing the news report recently where someone said that um, you shouldn't be touching kids unless the kid gives their permission. And a lot of people's response was, "It is my child." You know, what kind of craziness has the world got to where you're asking kids for their permission for things? I know better than my child. But it is true that you know you should take the kid's lead on it. But then for me, that even extends to adults. So to adults, to animals. So I think I'm a bit different to most people in relation to animals. If I see a cat, for example, my instinct isn't to go and pet the cat. Whereas I know Abby's instinct is largely cat, go and pet it. My instinct is, oh, I like that cat, that a nice little cat there. And I get down on the cat's level. And if the cat decides to come to me and decides it's going to go where it looks like it perhaps, it's come all the way up to my leg or whatever, and it looks like maybe it wants me to stroke its side by the way it's perhaps rubbing against my leg, then I'll reach down to go and stroke its side. And if it still seems to be staying there as if that's what it wants, then I'll, you know, actually do the stroke. And if it then still carries on engaging with that, then I'll carry on doing it. But it's entirely driven by the cat's response, not by my desire to stroke that cat. Yeah, and same with dogs as well. That I think the number of people that get bitten by dogs because they went in for the stroke and I would say misread the signs, but didn't even read the signs, not even misread them, just didn't read the signs, just went into stroke. So yeah, and it's the same like with horses. I grew up around horses. I have ridden bareback on horses that are not even broken in yet or in the process of just starting to be broken in. 'Cause my mum used to be a riding instructor, so would break in horses. And I would do it because the horse would come to me and the horse would engage with me and the horse would allow me to climb onto its back and would take me around where it's going. And it would be entirely led by the horse. So, yes, a part of the process of what's going on ends up led by me, in that, obviously I might squeeze its sides ever so slightly just to kind of almost encourage it to move forward a bit. I might touch the side of its neck gently or firmly, but softly and gently to kind of communicate relaxation to it. I would be relaxed sitting on its back. I might touch the side of its neck slightly to try and communicate which direction to go, or might move one thigh or the other to kind of just hint at what direction for it to move to. And you'll communicate through the touch that you've got with that horse just to guide it, but it has chosen to let me on its back and it has chosen to come to me in the first place. Everything was done because the horse allowed it to happen, not because I wanted it to happen. I was just engaging with it, letting it decide whether it was the right time or not. And whether it's with people or with animals, that's always been my kind of approach, that I don't approach people, I let people approach me. I don't normally make the first move on engagement in any way. I let people make that first move so that I'm just always kind of, respectful of whatever decision they make, not the other way around. And the same with children. It's down to them. The only time I might grab a child is if they're about to run in the road or something, put themselves at risk, where making that child safe is a greater priority than upsetting them. just stopping them crossing a road and getting hit by a car is more important than whether they wanted to be stopped at that moment, because my job isn't to be their best friend either. Um, just like I would grab a dog if I thought it was about to bite someone or something, and grabbing it might stop it being able to bite them. But as a general rule, my interactions are always going to be led by the animal or whatever, or the person. And mum always said that there was something strange about my ability from an incredibly young age to be able to just interact with horses as if we were one, as if we knew each other, and I could just climb on, stand at the fence, horse would come to me, I'd climb on its back because it would come along the side of the fence and allow it, and then we'd go around the field, and it hasn't been broken in yet, and yet when it's been broken in, it's bucking and being a bit of a pain, and yet I've already gone and got on it perfectly fine, as if there's nothing wrong with it. It just was doing it on its terms. I haven't ridden a horse as an adult, but because can't afford to go out on horses as an adult, but as a child, when mum was a riding instructress, up until being a teenager, I'd be on horses very, very frequently. So anyway, it's been 3 hours, 12 minutes and 19 seconds, 20 seconds. I've nearly finished this very cold coffee at midnight. That's okay. So my thinking with these is, so at the last live thing I did was, obviously I was predominantly doing the channel update, and then there was lots of other questions that cropped up, and so I just carried on interacting. And milliseconds aren't written up on my timer, I'm afraid. Yeah, coffee at midnight, very sensible. I started the coffee 3 hours ago, though, over 3 hours ago. Probably 3.5 hours ago I started this coffee. So I did the live one the other day that was predominantly for just doing a channel update, but then obviously I carried on answering questions. This is a better place to answer some of the questions I was answering on the other one, because this is a more suitable channel, this over here on the Mind Changers. So tonight I thought, why don't I do at least one over here on the Mind Changers? Obviously there's fewer people that will see that it's gone live, because there's a much smaller audience here. There's only like 2,050 or something subscribers here. But part of my thinking was it would be nice to be able to do a regular, because I don't do my Monday night thing now. It would be nice to perhaps do a regular thing, just a chatty thing, maybe on the Mind Changers channel, where people can ask questions, as have been asked here. I know we've talked about lots of other stuff as well, but as have been, like Star Wars and Star Trek and Lord of the Rings got a mention, Avengers. So we've had a few other bits, but there has been talk about therapy, and there's been talk about anxiety and panic attacks. And we've talked obviously about abuse and human interactions. And I started off with talking about philosophy and talking about consciousness and what it means to be conscious, in terms of, like, if you had your consciousness in a computer versus in your body, is that still you, or is that whatever that is in the computer and not you? So we'd had all these interesting talks. And obviously I would be more than happy to have answered any other kind of questions that came along, in terms of anything to do with literally any of my books around me. I'm always happy to get books out on camera and talk about different books and things. Yeah, I can't imagine that David would do it this late. He's a tad older than I am, but I'm sure there's lots of stuff. I think he would love to do a live thing. But yeah, I know that he would love to do a live thing. It's just, I think he may not be so, I'd have to talk to him, but he may not be so comfortable doing a completely spontaneous live thing. Like, I literally obviously have no notes or anything. I just trust that there's at least a core bunch of you who jump in many of these live chats, um, especially the blue spanner people. Um, so I trust that you would obviously just throw out questions and things, especially if you saw, for example, if you saw that David was like uncomfortable with, oh, I don't know what I'm going to say or whatever, I'm sure that you just throw out some questions and have some questions for him that would make him comfortable because he'd be answering things that he knows. But from his perspective, I think he's more used to doing everything scripted, and he's been a broadcaster, and a lot of the stuff I think he likes to write scripts and do everything scripted, and he'll use like he'll do like PowerPoint presentations for things rather than so for example, I did my autism talk for the doctors and medical professionals, etc. I had that list. That was my talk. A few bullet points. He had slides and bits like that. So on here, he wouldn't be able to give a presentation because he'd have to set up software to do that and not use, he'd have to use OBS or something, which is like a streaming software that I use when I do my gaming. Yeah, he can tell you about the Rainbow Bus. But yeah, to do a presentation on YouTube, he'd have to have streaming software, and that's extra things for him to work out setting up. Whereas doing what I'm doing, he could easily do this. It's just whether he would be comfortable enough doing it. The black box with the blinking lights, yeah. It was just whether he'd be comfortable with it and what time he would want to do it. Because that's the difficulty, that most of you are in America, and although David could do it like a Saturday or a Sunday, so hopefully a weekend day when people might be a bit more free, the chances are it could be at a time that isn't so convenient. It definitely won't be at a time, like I'm kind of okay with doing 9 till midnight-ish. That's fine for me. David will probably do like an hour, not 3 hours. He's not stupid. But he would probably prefer to do it at maybe 7 o'clock, or he's kind of busy, I think, around tea time-ish. So he'd probably want to do it at like 7 or 8, maybe, or do it at like 4 or something, or 3, which is then getting to a time where it might not be convenient for all the Americans among you. But yeah, it'd be good if he could do it. Yeah, so having a time limit to what he said. But yeah, but one thing obviously that was mentioned in the last stream was about me doing a podcast. And I used to do, as I said at the beginning of this, I think, podcasts like with Graham and things like that. And I loved doing it with Graham because we just bantered off each other and bounced off each other. And he would always be so kind of intrigued with what I'm going to say next to an answer for a question. It'd be like, I've got to ask Dan this because I want to know what kind of weird answer he's going to give to that. So Graham and myself would kind of bounce off each other, and I don't have anyone to do that with now, to bounce off with as like a co-host, so to speak. So then it's what I'd be really curious to hear, maybe in comments after this is aired. So you don't have to do it tonight. You can think about it like homework. You can think about it and then let me know in the comments beneath this video what kind of, if I were to do a podcast type of thing, what kind of thing you would want that podcast to be. Because the difficulty is I don't want it to be a rigid, I'm not very good at things that are rigid and end up sounding cold and boring. One thing I like about doing this is that I have absolutely no idea what you're going to ask in the live chat. And when you ask in the live chat something, because I have no idea what it is, I have no idea what rabbit hole of knowledge or topic or whatever I'm going to be going down. And, I didn't know I was going to be talking about time distortion. I didn't know that I was going to be talking about consciousness. I didn't know anything that I was going to be talking about, but all of it could have made interesting bits in a podcast. But then yeah, so really, just I'm interested what you would think. Oh, I would listen to that podcast if Dan published that. How long would you want the podcast to be in terms of like, do you want it to be 30 seconds? Do you want it to 30 seconds? My 30 seconds. So 30 minutes. Do you want it to be an hour? Do you want it to literally be something like a mega podcast that's like 3 hours long or something stupid? That's probably too long unless you're going to make a long journey. How long would you want the podcast to be? You can tell it's gone midnight now, and I've been talking for 3.5 hours. How long would you want the podcast to be? Would be a nice kind of like, oh, I'd love a podcast of that kind of length. What kind of format would you want it to take? Just really share. I don't care if you write. I write long messages sometimes, nearly all the time, in reply to people. Trying to overshare to make sure I definitely answer people's questions with everything they could possibly want to know in that answer. You're up in 4 hours and 10 minutes. That's good. Get up an hour early and you'll be able to have an hour to write your answer in the comments section. But yeah, so it's really however, write whatever you want, but just write, what kind of length you'd want it to be, how you'd like it to be structured. If you agree with something someone else has written, just say that you agree with what someone else has written. I like the idea of this or whatever, just so that I can get an idea of, is it something I think I could do? Because I still have Podbean as something I'm paying for currently, because of the fact that there are still some people who had their yearly subscriptions that don't run out till December. So I'm still paying for Podbean. And I could carry on paying for Podbean, although I don't make any money out of podcasts unless I get lots of people subscribing and can then put an ad or something at the beginning to say, buy this whatever junk or something. But yeah, so any thoughts you've got, I'm interested in. How does a podcast differ from what you're doing now? Well, the main difference is that it would be like something you could perhaps just download and listen to. So it's not interactive necessarily like this, but something you could download and listen to. So again, how planned you think is also a thing. Like I could even do a podcast where it's a mix of something like this. So I make the podcast live almost, but then it wouldn't end up half an hour. Yeah, we're nearly gone though. But yeah, so a podcast is pretty much that's different to this would be that it would be probably like a fixed half hour or an hour. It might vary slightly based on what's being talked about, but it wouldn't be an interactive thing. It would just be something you can download the audio of and listen to, in your own time, like when you're walking around, when you're doing the washing up, when you're going to the shops, when you're in your car. Just something you can listen to, perhaps educational. Some podcasts are just funny, but with me, it probably won't be funny. But just something that you're able to listen to that's pre-recorded. Because something with the live chat may be good for those who are here, but it doesn't necessarily make it good for those who watch afterwards. Yes, I'm hoping I don't get asked any questions that take me down rabbit holes that make me still be here. But yeah, so that's kind of the idea. So any comments you've got, if you think, oh yes, I'd love Dan to do a podcast, and in relation to these, if you've got thoughts on what you would like to see me do if I did a live thing, like say on a Monday night on the Mind Changers instead, so it's interactive like this is, and you've got thoughts of, oh, I'd love it if, whatever. It could just be kind of a free-flowing thing where people submit ideas of things they would like me to talk about beforehand, just to get conversation started. But yes, I will go now before I keep talking and explaining more. I can always explain and respond to comments. Not tonight, but respond to comments. Does a podcast count towards the 19 channels? Not if I put the podcast on this channel. Then I manage to merge it into one channel. Because I can always put the audio onto this channel as well as sharing it on a podcast thing. But yeah, so that could be something I could then just do on a Monday night. So I will go now because it's approaching 12:30. I've been here for nearly 3.5 hours, and I've just finished my coffee. So that's a good time for bed. So thank you all for joining me here. For the first one of these, I numbered it. That implies there's going to be more. I had this feeling there could end up being more, so I numbered it. So yeah, thank you all for joining me here. Feel free to like if you like, dislike if you want to dislike. And I'm just going to look at the poll quickly. End poll. Does it show me? I pressed end poll. It's not showing me. Oh, that's a pointless poll. It doesn't show you. Never done a poll before. I just saw that I could. Oh, do you want more of these pictures? 93% of people said, yes, do more of these. 6% of people said, no, go away. Never want to see this again. So, yeah, not many people, but generally the consensus out of the 31 people is that something like this is a positive thing. I know that's not many numbers, but I don't think 31 votes on a channel that's as small as this compared to my other channel with 88,000 people is too bad. So obviously I'm grateful for all of you who Annie voted no. Don't know who Annie is. Yes, I saw there was 2 trolls. Oh, Abby. Yeah, Abby voted no. Don't do this. Yeah, I saw there was 2 trolls. I didn't get to see what the second troll wrote. I didn't get to scroll down fast enough to see it. I saw what the first troll wrote. And I thought, oh, one of my spanner people will jump in and delete that. I read it and I thought, oh, that's a stupid thing to say. Yeah, autocorrect. I always get autocorrect saying Annie as well. It's like I literally correct it to Abby every single time and it always comes back saying Annie. So anyway, spanners were waved. Anyway, thank you all for being here, and I shall see you all. I think I actually also posted a video tonight as well, the video that Ellen couldn't find. But yeah, so anyway, I will see you all whatever the next day is that I do something, probably next week now. See you later. And thanks again for being here.